Okay, and we are live. Hello and welcome to episode 32 of Foreign and Domestic Unfiltered Podcast. I'm your host, Ramon Mile. And with me today, folks, returning champion Kevin Hammer is back for back to back episodes. Back to back episodes, folks. If you caught the last one, we definitely spent a ton of time debating and just sort of like milling over our thoughts on economic policy in America and a few other things. But today we're going to go right for the heart of what most people spend their time online debating and talking about is the culture wars. So Kevin picked a few topics that he thought would evince the best discussion between us two, centering around that. And so he's got some topics. He's going to kick us right off. We're going to hop right into it because we were already about to start recording the podcast before we recorded. So we got to go.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back on. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess in this, one of the reasons I really wanted to discuss the culture wars, especially with you, because I felt like we had a great conversation last time, is because while I do believe that at the end of the day, when it comes down to, voting, when it comes down to choosing who your representation is going to be, whether that be locally, statewide, nationally, whatever it may be, I do feel that most people do think about, those table issues. They think about how they're doing financially at the time. Are they feeling comfortable? Do they feel safe in regards to that? But with that said, I do think that the culture wars are playing an increasing role in our elections. And I really point to Virginia personally.
Mhm.
To really focus on that. I mean, we were looking at the race in Virginia, and we had Youngkin. He focused in on education, parents' rights in education, and it really was a game changer. Republicans and Democrats have both acknowledged that. So I
I mean,
really,
I mean, and just real before we leave the Youngkin, that topic you just brought up, I think that it's just my personal opinion from my political analysis of everything that I saw leading up to that.
Mhm.
McAuliffe ran a dog shit campaign, in my opinion. He basically did the classic Democrat. You guys like this Republican? Well, look, I'm kind of like a Republican a little bit. Like he did that classic milk toast, like trying to play the middle of the fence thing, and don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything wrong from McAuliffe or taking anything away from his strategy because I think he played the politics well for what the moment war it was. I can't claim to know what's in the man's heart as far as what he's actually going to do or
Mhm.
anything like that. And he's done a few things I don't really agree with, but surprise, he's a Republican. But I feel like some people in the media, like mainstream media, have made that out to be way more of a bellwether than what it really is. I mean, let's not forget we're talking about like Virginia. There's a ton of states in our union that literally just love to go back and forth between Democrat and Republican. Like they're just like, oh, he
Yeah.
sucks, other side. Oh, they suck, other side. Nonstop. I'm pretty sure Virginia's gone back and forth like 6 times in a row or something. So I'm just saying, like, it's not like, there's like a fucking Democrat governor one in like Kentucky or a Republican one New York. Like people are making it seem like, oh, this is crazy. Like I think it was
Yeah.
just we hadn't seen an election that wasn't a national election in a while since COVID, and COVID's been feeling like it's like 10 years long. I think that's a
Yeah.
big part of it.
Well, for me, it's more the fact that I see it as transformative, not so much necessarily as a reflection with the strategy. Actually, with strategy, yes. I see it more as a change in regards to approach from Republicans. All right. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to education, and even, this is anecdotal, but areas where I've been able to connect with even people who are more left leaning than myself, liberals and, so on and so forth, has been on education. When we talk about what children are learning, the rights of parents to be able to be aware of what their children are learning, to have a say in what their children are learning, that is something that does speak to a lot of people across the political spectrum, especially when you're dealing with school boards that have pretty much just run everything and even tried to run over parents. Then you add COVID to that and how
Mhm.
schools have been responding to COVID. I think there's just so much around education. That's why I chose it to be the first issue that we focus on. where I really think it's going to be a part of the culture war, part of politics, that's really possibly going to play a very transformative role in 2022. And I don't even just mean like, elementary, middle school, high school, even college, right?
Mhm.
I think we're going to see a lot of change there, a lot of focus there, from both possibly the Democrats and Republicans, because it's become a battleground. I really do believe that. I
Well,
think though,
I
what
personally, I think that the college, like the whole that it seems like all the people on the right that were sort of trying to make that their hobby horse have moved on. Like Barry Weiss is not doing that shit anymore. Charlie Kirk, even like, what's it called? What the fuck is that group called? Turning Point USA. Like they don't even really like they're not really like beating that drum so much anymore. I think they've all moved on to like what you're mentioning, like with CRT, elementary, middle school, high school and stuff. It seems like they're all very focused on that. So it seems like they've seeded the college fight, which always seemed like in my opinion, like, don't get me wrong, a lot of those groups like Turning Point USA were, they were AstroTurf funded groups. Like there wasn't at the beginning, it was just like huge injections of money from insanely wealthy right-wing benefactors they were sort of astroturfing a lot of that shit. So there wasn't there wasn't going to be any staying power on that, because me and you touched on it in that last podcast where it was like, you know, people upset about like, oh, college campuses, this and that is happening. It's like, and I mentioned like the education, the actual physical infrastructural places that education takes place at are liberal bastions by definition, because you know progressive people are much more likely to be educators. But and that's like triple fold for colleges. Like there was no long term game there. I feel like a lot of people just like made their career. Candace Owens, PragerU got huge off of that. Like,
mm-hmm.
and now it's just like they've all pivoted when it seemed like it was like, oh, this is our fight that we're doing. Like, this is our whole meaning for being. And then immediately it was just like, oh, no one cares about this anymore. All right, let's pivot.
That's the interesting thing is it's still going on though. I mean, you still see a lot of conservative speakers going to colleges and working on
Sure.
growing the conservative presence on college campuses. But I do agree with you in regard a little bit in regards to no one kind of caring in one way. I think the era that we had, that little era that we had, where a controversial speaker would show up at a college, and then the protesters would come and even destroy things, and that captured America for a while. It captured the views, but even though that's still happening, like there are still there are still speakers going to colleges and they're still being protested. I have watched a couple of them, but it's not making the headlines the way that it once did. And I think that's just because as consumers of media, Americans, we tend to be very fickle, and we tend to want to move on quickly. We want something new, we want something interesting. So
Well, plus all the star power left. Like Crowder doesn't do it anymore. Shapiro doesn't do it anymore. And I'm not saying they don't speak at colleges, but they don't make their media pushes based around, hey, I'm like going to intentionally go to this liberal super lib college and then like talk and just to piss off 95% of the people here. You know what I mean? Like
well,
they're just not doing it anymore. So I think that's really all it is. Like it's just the big names on the right are just they're on the new shit, man, for whatever reason. But I think that's why it's not. I think that's why no one's paying attention to it anymore, because it's literally the biggest YouTube channels, the biggest podcasts, so on and so forth on the right have all moved past it. Like, Crowder's doing like general political commentary now, where that was his, Change My Mind. That was like his thing.
I love Change My Mind. I am gonna. I love Change My Mind though. I loved Change My Mind. I really did.
I won't lie, it was fun to watch. It was funny.
It was great to watch. That's the thing. Crowder, at the end of the day, he is comical. I'm sorry, whether you hate him or not, I think he is amusing. But when he interacts with people, that's actually very interesting as well, how people respond to him. So the whole Change My Mind segments, like I really think that was a stroke of genius on his part, at least in regards to drawing a crowd, getting some attention there. But I still go back to the fact that I don't think that conservatives have given up on college campuses. I just think there's been a shift in focus in regards to what is the priority. And this is where I'm looking at school in general. We're looking at elementary, middle school. and a little bit in with high school as well. As we saw in Virginia, I don't know how familiar you are with the circumstances, because actually the Daily Wire that attributes itself to breaking the news when it comes to what happened in Virginia. There, you have a school district. A young girl is sexually assaulted by a young man that identifies as, I believe it was non-binary or non-conforming, wearing a skirt
What does
in
that even
the
mean? I don't know. I honestly don't know what that means. What does that mean?
what specifically? I said a little bit there.
Like
Non-binary gender.
non-binary. What does that mean? Like you personally don't identify as man or woman? You're just like in
Yes,
the ether? That's what that
that
means?
is pretty much non-binary. In terms of gender identity, means that you do not identify as a man or a woman.
Okay. I'm telling on
Um,
myself here, but I'm being honest. I didn't
yeah,
know.
no.
I didn't know.
That is what it means. Mind you, it's interesting because it's new to a lot of people in the community as well. I'm going to be fully honest. For the longest time, you're looking at the community, which I refer to as, alphabet soup and myself, because it really has. I think the longest one that I've seen, and you're talking to someone here who was an activist once upon a time in that community, and the longest one I've seen is LGBTQIAA. What was it? P 2SP, I think. I think that was what. Yeah. So it's yeah, it got a bit crazy, but non-binary, yeah, that's just the gist of
So
it.
I didn't mean to
It's
railroad you. Keep going with the story because I didn't hear. I don't
Yeah.
know anything
So,
about this.
anyways,
So let me know what
so
happened.
there was a situation with a sexual assault of a young girl. There was a school board meeting where the father came, and I feel so, especially now knowing the backstory, rightfully expressed anger at the school board for what he felt was covering up what happened to his daughter. And this story broke. It went national. It became a focus, or at least the issue became a focus in the election in Virginia. Then we also had other stories pop up about certain books being in schools, books being accessible to middle schoolers, even that describes sexual acts in a very graphic fashion. So
Mhm.
very quickly it
You're
spun,
talking about Mao? Is that
and
that book Mao that everyone was upset about? That was the book or
oh no,
MAU?
that was
Or
this. That's more recently. No, I'm talking about
oh,
queer
okay.
theory, gender identity.
Okay.
Shoot, I'm forgetting the name of the book right off the top of my head, but there was a book where it apparently described intimacy between young, like two young boys, and that obviously that was something that created a lot of controversy and got a lot of parents upset, and in my mind, rightfully so. Mind you, so this is happening at the same time that critical race theory is being a focus as well. So this happened in Virginia when we're also starting to have a discussion about critical race theory in school, and I feel like this just kind of snowballed. And what we saw in Virginia was what many had referred to as the parents' election, the parents'
Mhm.
vote, because the Republican Party, did seize on that, and they said, "We're doing this for you." I mean, there was even an ad where it took, all of, I always butcher his name. It's McAuliffe, right? Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
where they took all of his statements regarding parents and how they shouldn't have say in schools. They took those clips and just that was the ad, and they ran it.
Right.
So this is why when I look at Virginia, I know, because as you said, right, it's not like a Republican won, New York, or a Democrat, just took over Texas completely or something. Like that's true. That is absolutely
Well,
true.
that is coming on the horizon, my friend, but
We'll see.
we'll
We'll see with that though. We will see. But
you can't
no, I know
gerrymander
it's.
your way out of that shit. There's too many.
I don't know. Hey, the
Texas
Democrats are
getting
doing a great job
Texas
gerrymandering
getting
here in New
real
York.
blue. Oh no, they are. But I'm just saying, statewide elections, you can't. There's no electoral finagling that. Texas is turning blue, my boy. I give it like
Hmm.
less than 8 years, maybe 2 more cycles. You're gonna
So
see
we'll
a
see what
Democrat
blue
governor.
means. We'll see what
Well,
blue ends up representing. I mean, when you look
it
at
was like
Florida, Florida has the
54%,
most.
something like that. That's what I
Yeah,
think.
but when you look at Florida, right? Florida, for the first time in its history, has the highest, has more Republicans registered, has the highest number of Republicans that it's ever had. So we are seeing shift. Now, mind you,
Mhm.
that's I feel like that's a discussion in and of itself there when it comes to Florida. So I do want to bring us back to
Continue.
when it comes to education, because there is a lot of discussions. Critical race theory, I've been in a lot of discussions about that. Because I will say this, it's very vague. At least how a lot of people describe it will be very vague. What's interesting to me about critical race theory is you talk to three Republicans, three Democrats. You talk to three people on this side, three people on that side, not even necessarily, party affiliation involved there, and you'll get like six different ideas of what critical race theory is sometimes,
Mhm.
because it can be so difficult for people to really pin it down. And I think that's kind of the point, to be honest, for some people who do favor it, is that if it's difficult for people to pin down what you're pushing, what you favor, it's then not as easy for them to actually prevent it, or to basically take it on. They
See, I would
can't take it
argue, I would
on.
argue, I would argue the inverse. It's easier for people on the right, which is what my theory is, what's been happening with critical race theory. It's easier for them to create a monster, a boogeyman that no one knows anything about. Because the reason no one knows anything about CRT is because it's really not happening on any large scale in the country. We're talking about like some super liberal bastions where that shit is happening. That's, and I mean, I feel like the facts bear that
So
out. Like this isn't some large scale
I know you're
program
doing the fringe.
that.
You're doing the fringe argument, but
Well, no, hold on. But
yeah,
what I'm
yeah.
saying is, I'm not saying that it isn't happening. It didn't. I'm not saying it was completely astroturfed. Like it didn't come to the forefront of conversation, because it did happen in some places and people found out about it and reacted. I'm not saying that didn't happen. But what I'm saying is the fact that critical race theory has been around for super long. It really hadn't been introduced in any statewide fashion anywhere. Even the year, because this started being an issue politically. I started hearing the murmurs about it like late 2020, and then it didn't really get thrust into the forefront of the mainstream until more the Shapiros, the people we named earlier, really started hammering down on it, and then it sort of got forced into the forefront because a lot of people on the left were forced to react to that political discourse. But the thing is, like, the reason when you ask people on the street, like, just simply what is critical race theory, even the people who are mad at it and think it's like fucking, Karl Marx himself is in school teaching boys to be girls or anything like that or whatever, like, it's because it's not really happening in their school district. People are just like, oh, I don't want this here. And there's literally just like whole school systems that are like, yeah, we have no intention of, we don't know what it is. Like,
So
I've witnessed this
okay.
in many school board meeting things I've seen all over the
Uh,
country. It's happened here in New York in our own backyard. I'm just saying, where you people got to show me.
yes.
You got to show me the yellow cake. You know what I'm
So
saying? Like,
have
this is some
have
real
you
Colin Powell.
researched?
This is some real Colin
Okay.
Powell shit.
So I really got to ask then, have you researched specific examples of what people then at least deem critical race theory? Like, just a video recently came up of, like, I believe it was fifth graders chanting, being led by their teachers in school, chanting Black Lives Matter. As far as I know, now I need to confirm more. This actually was something that I was just made aware of today. What was interesting with that is these kids are being, led. There was a video. The kids are being led by their teachers to chant like Black Lives Matter. Why are children being led to chant anything like that that's politically divisive in school, especially at such a young age? So
That's a
these
that's
are
a
things that
recent
are happening. So
popular that's a
I
recent popular political social
okay,
movement. That doesn't
we're
mean
all
that's CRT though.
okay.
That's what
Okay,
like
but here's what I want to say. Here's
that's
what I
what
want to say,
people are
because I
ascribing
know
to it.
where you're going with it. I know where you're going. So my very
Well,
mayor.
rebut
Okay,
to it.
so
I just
you're
you
talking about
answer
things not happening a lot. You're
respond to
talking
what I'm
about things not
saying.
happening a lot. I know, and this is
How could
why
it
I'm
not just
trying
be
to.
that?
I'm trying to respond, because you're saying it's not happening a lot, right? But then
No,
why
that
not
specific
say,
instance. How is that
okay,
CRT? Just a
okay, okay,
classroom
okay.
of people
So
saying
no, no, no. Okay.
BLM.
So this
Why
is
wasn't it
why
CRT? Why
this is
wasn't it
where I
CRT
was
the
going
summer
with
of George
CRT.
Floyd? That's what I'm saying.
This is why I was going with it in regards to CRT. So what I propose, especially when I'm talking to conservatives, this is where I'm initially going with it, is since they made CRT, at least how it said. So I feel like it's more like the left pushing it very vaguely, because then when a conservative says that's CRT, no, it's not. It's not labeled CRT. No, it's not being taught. It's not being taught at all. So I'm like, okay, then get specific with what issues you have, whether
No,
it's CRT or not.
Kevin, what is CRT? I'm going to ask you the same thing they ask on the street. What do you think? How do you define CRT? Do you define it as what the actual academic
So
formatting
yeah,
of
you're
the
looking at
people who
your
developed CRT, or are you just encompassing any
no,
social
okay, so
movement
right.
that
There
has
is
to do with
legitimately, obviously,
minorities as
those who
CRT?
developed CRT, right? You're looking at a political movement. You're looking at basically taking the struggle between the working class and the upper class and applying that in regards to race and those approaches, and then putting that in academia. I mean, I fully get that, but things also then take on a life of their own. So this is why I was going in the direction that I was going in. Is
Wait, but you
that
still haven't defined what you think CRT is to me. But you just told me what I think it
I
is.
think
What do you
CRT
think it is?
is from
Which
what
that's not what I think it is, by the way.
from what
That's
I've read. From what I've read, so obviously moving academia, and at least those that I've read who obviously those who found it and then those who champion it, is very much with CRT is addressing more of the institutional racism, the belief that in every aspect, every fact, every aspect of society, we have a racist structure that needs to be addressed.
mhm.
And it's about basically, so it's a theory in general. So it's a theory that basically America, its roots, everything involved in it, is therefore, in a way, I mean, this is my with that, is that basically it's been tainted by racism.
Mhm.
That everything, it's basically, it's the what is it, the fruit of the poison tree, or whatever that. So the poison fruit there. So
So
that
before
is,
I'll let you keep going, I just want to tell you what my understanding of CRT is,
yeah,
just so we understand each other. So
yeah.
the CRT was a theory that was created in I can't remember what I can't remember exactly where, but it wasn't even in America. It was someone studying American history, and it was basically a group of intellectuals that were coming up with a theory to explain the way that they were basically trying to make the case that the way that racism was ingrained in legal systems in America, which I agree with you, we're basically at the same definition of how it was so ingrained that it permeated into the culture and created a formation of systematic racism. Yeah, so we're at least on the same page as on that regard. But it wasn't something in modernity. Like, it wasn't even in the 21st century that this was theorized initially. It only got popularized as people began championing it.
Well,
So I
you're
agree
dealing
with you
with
again on
critical,
that.
yeah, because you're also going back to critical theory. It's funny. I actually once did a stream on it myself, and I was trying to find my notes for it, but I wasn't
Mhm.
able to find them. I had the names and all that stuff, so I do apologize because I was not able to find that, and it was a very long list. But so at least we have some agreement, right, on
Right,
where we
right.
stand with critical race theory. So
Sure. So just to clarify the last thing where we were disagreeing before, you think that a classroom of fifth graders saying BLM is under the umbrella of CRT because Black Lives Matter inherently believes that this country is systematically racist. Therefore, that is a teacher teaching CRT.
in a way, yes. In a way, yeah.
Okay.
I
No,
believe
I'm just trying to
they're teaching
get
what they,
clarity.
yes. Because this is why then, okay, so this is what I was trying to get to before we went on where we did. This is why I actually encourage people to forget addressing it as CRT. I understand you want to use it as an umbrella term, right? So this is where I would
I
tell
don't.
people, especially, no, I wasn't talking necessarily to you
No.
specifically,
I'm
all
just
right?
letting you know I don't, because I
Yeah,
dislike that very much. Like, I want to
yeah.
specifically talk about what we're talking
So
about.
this is where I try to get to the details of it, right?
Okay.
This is where I try to get to the details of it. And I talk to conservatives, and mind you, this is a conversation I do mainly have with conservatives, but concerned parents in general, because I actually do talk to a lot of parents who don't have an understanding of what this is. Like I said, once again, I wish I had my notes. I even have like the intellectuals. I had their names and everything, but I couldn't
Mhm.
find it. Again, so I asked them, what concerns you um, about what's being taught in school, and ask questions. So this is what I tell parents, and this doesn't just go for CRT. It doesn't just queer theory. It goes for everything, right? My main thing to parents is, and I feel like especially conservative parents have been really bad at this. Have conversations with your children when it comes to
Mhm.
school. I'm not saying just how was your day? Did you have a test? How'd you do on the exam? How was your homework? No, you need to have detailed conversations. If I had a child in school right now and they came home, what I would be asking them is a few things. What have you learned about race? What are you learning about race? Are you learning about privilege? Are you learning that one race is inherently more privileged or oppressed? Are you learning this? Are you being told that you need to believe this? When it comes to what are you being taught about sexuality? What are you being taught about sexual behavior? What are you being taught about gender?
Mm.
So where I was trying to go with it, I know we did get out a good discussion there. I was trying to push through the labels of things and talk to parents about asking your children questions.
Sure.
Because you're right. Like I said earlier, talk to 6 different people, you can get 6 different ideas of what critical race theory is. Even
Mhm.
as I explained it myself, I got it is the idea that, privilege about racism being so ingrained in America, right? And in its systems, in its government, and its all that stuff, right? That is, I will be honest, that is the main takeaway I got from even reading some of the work by the original founders of critical race theory, of where that came from. When I have read a little bit of their thoughts on the topic, that is what I took away from it. Right.
Mhm.
And mind you, someone else is going to read it and take away from it, possibly something a little bit different. But that's why I try to break through that. I want to break through that critical race theory label. I want to break through that gender theory label, queer theory label, and get to what issues concern parents. And this is what I said. I try to have those conversations with parents because there are a number of things that I don't believe should be taught in school. So once
Yeah,
once
I was
we
gonna
break,
say, so we're me and you are here now. Forget the parents. So
yeah,
let's narrow down on some specific points
yes,
of what we
that's
were just
yep,
talking
yep.
about. So I want to roll right into, because this is like I mentioned before we went live, me and Patter touched on this, and we sort of got granular on a few different parts of it. Now I want to kick right off with what me and you were talking about prior to going live, which was,
Mhm.
the concept of teaching children, and I want to make this exclusive my argument, or not my argument, but what my issue is with
Mhm.
some of these things being taught in school. I want to center it around, or I want to specifically delineate, like, I have an issue with young children being taught this. I don't have an issue with it at a high school level. If people want to choose that course to take it, then go ahead. Same thing in college. Like, you're old enough, you can fucking make that choice if you want to do that stuff. But what I want to talk about is, like, the concept around, like, white fragility, white privilege, things like that. Um, in my personal opinion, when you're talking about, like, kids like K through 8, um, regardless of whatever the people who champion these things, and don't get me wrong, I don't disagree with the fundamental basis of what the theory is saying. I mean, I sort of find it difficult for people who know history, global history, American history, and see the way that, just analytic, like, data has shaken out as far as generational wealth, all kinds of other shit. That's why I try to base most of my arguments around, like, clear data that we can see. I think it's a little hard for people to argue that there hasn't been and still isn't any remnant of some level of systematic racism in America, just simply on economic terms. So that's point A. But point B, um, I think that I have an issue with that as a black man. Now, I'm biracial. My mother's white, my father's black. I grew up in a super mixed area in Schenectady. It was probably 50-50 when I went through school. It was just half white, half black, whatever, a bunch of smattering of other races in the middle. Um, but I think that like, I know from my experience of growing up and not really having to deal with too much overt racism. Now, I might be biased, and my example's super anecdotal, because most of my time spent in that K through 8 age was I was playing sports. I had camaraderie with the people I was playing with, so race sort of gets eliminated by like that concept. When you're on a team with people, it's much less likely for those things to bubble to the surface. And I think that because everything was so mixed race wise, that it wasn't as big of a problem in Schenectady as me witnessing it or happening to me. Now, you would see the instances of like people saying slurs and stuff like that, but I would chalk that up largely to just like, just young, poor children and we are being shitty to each other. Like, I don't, it's hard for me to draw that line between like, oh, is someone actually racist? That's a really hard thing, in my opinion. Like, I know how easily a lot of people on the left like will label like, oh, this person's a racist because they said this. And it's like, all right, I told you on the last stream, I've worked with a ton of right-wing folks and blue collar work that I've done my whole life. And some of them have said kind of wild things that would certainly get them in trouble. And like today's, like if they said it on the internet or like if they had a prominent job where like they were on Twitter and people could drag them, but they can't because they like, are fucking driving a fork truck or holding a shovel. But, no, but the thing is, like, those are guys that I would work with 40, 50 hours a week. I knew their wives. I knew their kids, I think that a lot of folks have a hard time admitting the fact that sometimes people just say things on purpose to hurt people, but that, and it might feel it, and it's if you're defining a racist statement as I'm a black person, this person said this thing to me, I'm deciding it's racist because of how it made me feel, then that's how those people will define it. I have a little higher bar than that. But again, that's me personally. But when you talk about teaching K through 5 kids, some of the shit that I have seen, like if you read White Fragility, like, oh, telling little white kids like, oh, you're the product of this system and you're privileged and all these people are downtrodden and you should feel bad about that. I'm not a fan of that. Okay. So for 2 reasons, I'm real quick and I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah.
Fucking reason number 1 is look at all of us adults, right? Like we all have fully developed brains. We have the internet. We have the complete historical reference of all that we know has happened in the past, whether we agree on what really happened or not. But for the most part, we have the tools to be able to like, understand the facts around these things that we're debating around race and white fragility or concepts like that, white privilege, whatever. And it's driving us fucking crazy. Like for like years now, we've just been fighting and it's been just a neurosis that this country cannot shake and will not get past and can't get past at risk of other parts of our like that need attention in political discourse, not getting it and crumbling in the meantime while we're all still like debating whether Joe Rogan's a racist or not. I don't want that for K through 5 kids. I want them to actually be able to be kids. And if shit like that comes up, then hopefully you have someone in the building, whether it's a fucking guidance counselor or a resource, whatever, that can like deal with that on an individual level. But in my opinion, like, no, why would we're going to sit here and drop this like this neurosis causing topic that we don't have figured out on children? No. I don't agree with that. I don't think that does any good. I don't think that would have helped the situation of how, some racist things happened, whatever, when I grew up. I honestly don't think it would have. I'm a results person. I'm not about like, oh, we should pass this policy because it's going to make me feel good. I'm going to be on my moral high horse. No, I'm a straight up, is it going to be like effective? Is it going to do more good than bad? And when it comes to like that, like if you're telling a second grader that like, oh, you're actually a white oppressor and you should feel guilty about that. I'm not a fan. I don't, just like people don't want like little black kids to feel bad in school because like racist stuff happens. I don't want a little white kid to feel bad in school because someone's telling him like, oh, you're somehow like the white devil. I do not agree with that. I think that that's crazy talk. And I think it's actually really alarming that we've gotten to the point where there's a significant number of people with megaphones on the left who are able to say that with a clear conscience. That's disturbing to me. And that's honestly, like, as far as like my like knee-jerk pushback to a lot of this stuff, it really centers around that. Like, I don't want little kids, white or black, to like have to deal with like the mind fucking invasion of us pushing our fucked up politics on them. I want them to be able to be little kids, go eat peanut butter and jelly and like play recess and learn math and like have friends and be normal. I don't want to do that shit to them. I think it's a horrible idea. And yeah, that's it. I just wanted to get that out there real quick because just so you knew.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that.
When it comes to little kids, we're on the same page with that, man. Kids
So
want to
it's
start learning
interesting,
about
though,
that stuff and taking it electorally, go ahead. But no.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned something that actually it's kind of where I stand, where I look at both the left and the right, where I have in regards to my experience, because I'm not just critical of the left in this regard. I am also critical of the right at time, and I'm speaking about this specifically more culturally, as you were, not necessarily in regards to education specifically.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm kind of saying it a different way. I feel like sometimes when I interact with people on the right and the left, and I have over the past couple of years, I developed this opinion that many people on the right and on the left are at this opposite end of this issue regarding racism in America. I feel like there are elements on the left that see racism behind everything, everyone, every. I mean, I feel like they walk out their door and they might be afraid to open it completely because there might be racism on the other side of that door clinging to it.
Mhm.
Then there are those on the right that I have interacted with who honestly, they seem to feel like, racism disappeared in the 1960s or something. They just
Yeah.
vanished from the world. So it does. So I will admit
Right.
there are these two elements, and I've actually had these two different types of elements clash on my social media because I have friends from all across the political and social spectrum. So I've had those clashes actually happen on my social media. So it's been very interesting, and of course, I've even had some where both the right leaning person and the left leaning person blocked me because of how I address them. So I do want to say that is that the idea that something like that doesn't have an echo through history is it's absurd to believe that there's nothing that goes through
Right.
history. Do I believe that it is echoing through every fiber of America? Absolutely not. I don't think the data supports that at all, especially when you look at the highest earning demographics in America, and you look especially among the young adults. I just don't see where the data supports that. But to get to education, we definitely are agreeing there when it comes to the youth. But the problem is that we are seeing that with the youth. And I want to actually bring up something that happened here in Schenectady, if you don't mind. I
Yeah, what
actually
happened?
did a stream on it recently. I had a friend of mine, Tom Kennedy. He came on to speak regarding the issue. So there's a middle school where the students requested of the board they be able to, during Black History Month, raise the BLM flag with the American flag, and in June, raise the Pride flag with the American flag.
Mhm.
And this has there's been certain response to that and stuff like that, so I did a stream on that. And me personally, I don't support it, but people jump to it. Now it's interesting because I would obviously, some people on the left would be like, well, you don't support that, so since you don't support it being the BLM flag, then that means you're racist. You don't support the pride flag in June, then you're obviously anti-LGBTQWXYZ LMNOP the eternity. And and I'm like, no. Personally, I think that for me, when it comes to the same thing with embassies. When I look at embassies outside of our country, when I look at state buildings, federal buildings, especially federal buildings, I believe that only the American flag should be flown. If it's a state building, okay, the state flag, then I'm fine with that. But especially there, when it comes, I feel like we are starting focusing on whatever it can to divide us along certain lines, whether that be race, whether that be gender identity, sexual orientation, and that concerns me. And a lot of people are like, well, it's just a symbolic, it's just this one thing, right? It's just, as you said, these instances are happening in this school and that school and this school, so it's like this
Mhm.
sprinkling, right? Now, now I know I'm going to get a certain reaction with this because I do, especially from the left. I get it more from the left than I do from the right. But the
Go
right
for it.
takes it wrong. That's the thing. I've had some people on the right take what I'm saying here wrong. So the reason why that concerns me, that sprinkling here, that sprinkling there, right? My I my existence today is a living example of how a sprinkling here and a sprinkling there becomes something completely different that transforms a country. My very existence today, the fact that I'm able to be openly gay and not worry about, legal prosecution, the fact that I'm married to my husband, those are both examples of a sprinkle here, a sprinkle there, transforming a nation. So when some people, when I get that argument, oh, you shouldn't worry about this happening. It's not happening to the degree you that the act. I'm like, I know that, but I look at the long game. Why? Because my life was the long game. So yeah, I do look at these sprinklings, and I have my concern because I see things that will continue to divide us, will move us far away from that dream that a person be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, or to add on to that, I guess, sexual identity, sex, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the tactics we're taking, even if it is sprinkles in schools, is leading us down a path that we will be more divided than ever. So that's my
So
response when people have that argument. It's just a sprinkler. It's just one school here, one school there. It's just one happening there.
Right, but so the reason that I said that, though, the reason that I said
Mhm.
like, hey,
Oh,
this
I
is
like keep falling asleep. Excuse me.
oh, it's okay.
Sorry.
No, the reason that I said that though is it wasn't like to, oh, why are you so worried about this? I'm saying it
Yeah.
because if it's popping up randomly and organically, like that example you were saying, the students asked, I don't see any problem with that, because what the school should do is, hey, you America, you want to claim you're the shining city on the hill of democracy? Let the kids fucking vote whether that flag goes up. Do that. I have no problem with that. I don't think anyone should have a problem with that. If the majority of the children in that school want to do that, let them do it. Like, what are we teaching here? What are we teaching? Everyone keeps talking about like new age education of free parenting and all this shit where you want to let kids be more independent to hopefully foster more creative growth and all this other stuff. Let them fucking have an election. Let them vote. I don't care. And then I just want to say, like, how you juxtaposed the two things of your very existence of your identity being allowed because of the sprinkling. I think that now, me personally, like, I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't compare, like, if you're comparing that to saying like a BLM flag flying, if you really look at the history of it, like the gay pride movement in America was much shorter lived than the black movement, for liberation in America. I mean, we're literally reaching back to slavery times and all of the fighting that went through that, abolition, civil rights, all of that. So I think that the skeptics on the left of that statement that you just said would mention that and be like, well, a big part of why that sprinkling immediately fostered into a policy change is because it was white men who wanted to get married. If that, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that there's a lot of credence to that argument. There's, it certainly took, quite a bludgeoning and a lot of civil unrest and a lot of things for the civil rights movement, Civil Rights Act to even get passed, which, really wasn't all that much if you look at it like historically of what happened and how long and how dragged out the fight was for the rights that were supposed to be encompassed in that to actually be put into effect fully by states. So I just, I don't know. I feel like I get what you're saying, where you're saying like, okay, it's something that you don't think is great, and I also to some degree don't think is great. I think it for different reasons, though. I don't think that
Mhm.
you're worried about the end political outcome. I'm not worried about the end political outcome. I'm worried about the effect now, because I am of the opinion, and I said this in that last episode that me and Patter talked about CRT on, is we're doing all of this in the discourse, driving each other mad and not finding any common ground and literally debating and arguing about two different things that
Mhm.
we don't agree on mean the same thing. I don't want to do that to children. I think in the short term, it's extremely a perilous path to walk down. That's why I disagree with it. I don't think that in like any long game that it's going to have a bad effect. I don't think it would really have much of any effect, because at the end of the day, from my experience, again, it's anecdotal, but I think your race relations are of what you grow up into are much more played out in how your family and how you grow up and how your parents are on race and the friends you make. I think that that's the real impact. It's not what some fucking teacher said to you in 5th grade. It's not whether your school flew a BLM flag or not. I think that it's who were your friends, who were people that you respected, who were folks in your family. What did you get steeped in? Did you grow up with a white dad calling people the N-word, or did you grow up with a black dad who hated white people? Did you, because like, again, like that shit is real, and people try to talk about like it's not. Like, no, those things exist, and they exist for a reason, because there's so much pain and fear and hurt in this country that had never really got ameliorated. Because you can't legislate away poor race relations. You know what I mean? Like, we've tried. And anyone, this is interesting because I actually I was going to have a podcast with some folks that I went to school with, that I'm in a football Facebook group with them, and some of them have football podcasts. And I don't know if you saw the recent controversy around the Miami Dolphins head coach that got
Yes, I've
fired.
heard that. Yes.
And I wanted to sort of like roll sort of like what we're doing right now into that. And I won't go into it here, but I think it brings up like a lot of interesting, it brings up a lot of interesting stuff. And these conversations get even more complex when we start talking about like electoralism, like what you referred to in the beginning of all of this, because I feel like people forget, as much as, the young left is very prominent on Twitter, social media spaces, and definitely seem to push the narrative. When it comes to policy, it's not them who actually do anything or get shit done. It's the Jim Clyburns. It's the fucking boomer black generation that actually gets the final call on a lot of the things that happen on race in this country, policy wise. And it's interesting to see I don't know if it's just a lot of people on the right don't realize that, or they don't have the same political analysis of like political power analysis of who actually who actually gets to pass legislation, or in what flavor and how radical it gets to be when it comes from the Democratic side of the aisle. Or it's just the fact that it's not easy. You can't get clicks. I can't get donations off Jim Clyburn. I need Jamaica Miles to be the front and center because she's the radical. You know what I mean? Just to use an example, or the Ocasio-Cortez or whoever else. But I feel like it's a really important point is when we talk about these kinds of things, look at defund the police. That got killed by old black people. It didn't get killed by the right. That got killed by old black folks that were like, no, I fucking want cops. Let's keep, like, if you really look at the data on election voting, election data from the last couple of years, 2018, 2020, that's how it happened. Like, if you cities and states that had referendums on that, old black folks came out and said, fuck no. So I'm just keeping it real here. Like,
yeah, no,
it's much more complicated than a lot of people, political pundits or content creators and stuff make it out to be, because there are quite a few. There's quite a large number of black folk that are like 55 and older that have immense power in the Democratic Party all throughout the country. And it definitely makes it changes the dynamic of how we analyze the power balance politically in this country.
And this is, I think, where you and I think we've kind of, anyone watching this could probably see what we touch on, is that I do think about immediate effect, but I do think I tend to be a long game person. It's just, it's been in my nature, right? Those 55-year-olds you mentioned, they're going to die. They're going to be dead and buried both on the right and the left.
Will they? Pelosi's running again, dude.
Oh, I know. That's okay. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
Please, Kevin.
I give you that. She might have found. So I said this about Pelosi once, and I got a bad reaction from a feminist friend. I was like, I think Pelosi may have found the fountain of eternal life, but not eternal youth. So she didn't find both. But yeah, no, I do see your point there. But I look at it as so I look at what a problem can become, right? It makes me think of when you see an odd mark on your body. I see an odd mark and I'm like, oh shit, what could it possibly become? I want to get looked at just to be safe, right? Do I wait until it changes? Do I wait until something happens to it, until it grows, until it becomes? No. I want to address it right now while I can, early on, cut it out if possible. So that tends to be my approach. And like,
would you use that same language if those kids wanted that? If that election happened and 70% of that school wanted it flown, would you? Here's
the thing with that.
Would you act or would you consider it in an authoritarian fashion to be like, no, this is for your own good, fuck you? Or would you let them do it?
I'm like you in this regard to the fact that when it comes to, so this is where I
I'm a
the
populist,
you and I
bro.
probably
Whatever
disagree.
people want to
You're what?
do, if we're voting, I'm a
Yeah.
populist. If people
So
want to do shit,
I'm not in regards to that, like the idea of the whole popular vote, because there was a time that if the majority of Americans were to vote on what should have happened to me, that would have been a very different end. The idea that the majority of Americans should always make the decisions on things, I think, is absolutely ridiculous. And if you look at it from a historical perspective, what people would have actually voted on if it was left up to the masses, what they would have possibly done to different groups of people, it's horrifying. So I don't favor that approach.
well,
I
we're
think
talking about
this.
flying a flag, not doing
Okay,
anything to
yeah, but
anyone.
still, I'm talking about in general. So I'm talking about
Yeah,
in
but you
general.
can't one to
I
one
don't
though.
like
We
the
can't
idea that,
compare
but
American
flags
democracy
have
to
symbolism, right? Symbols
persecution
have
of gay
power, but
people.
this is where
That's a
symbols
wide
have
gap.
power.
That's a wide
This is
gap,
where
bro.
symbols have power. But you understand, I'm very much about consistency of thought and application of that thought. If I have an issue with it here, I'm going to have the issue with it there, and I'm going to apply the logic and the thought with it. So that tends to be where I am. If I want to cut something out here because I see it as a possible threat in the future, I'm going to cut it out here because I see it as a possible threat in the future. And when it comes to schools, especially when younger children, I want to see themselves as one united country first before they see themselves as the things that are the differences. It doesn't mean the differences aren't important, but I believe the bond has to be developed young. That they are one nation. They're in this together. They're in this nation together. I believe that has to be developed young. So creating separate symbols and stuff like that, and putting that up there with the American flag, I believe that is divisive. I believe symbols have power, and I believe it creates more division in our country as a whole. It's planting a seed of division in our youth.
So what
So
about the blue?
absolutely
What
not. And
about the
then
Blue Lives Matter flag then? What
I don't
about
want that
the?
flown. I don't want that flown either. I know you're
Okay,
going to do
hey,
that, but
that's fair. I was
I
gonna
don't
say
want.
because if a huge portion of this country sees that as a divisive flag,
Yeah,
are you principled across the board with that?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't want school. Is for me, that's what's
You want
flying there
school to be
outside.
nonpartisan
I
completely.
don't want schools to be partisan. No, I do not.
Right.
I
Gotcha.
am very adamant
I'm
about that. I
fine with that, bro.
do not
I'm
want them to be
fine
partisan.
with it.
Like I said, I don't want a Blue Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Pride flag. I don't want any of that up there with the American flag. All right. I don't. So I stand strongly against that because, like
So
I
can I
said,
ask you a question? Can I ask you a
yeah,
question real quick? I think that so I think this is an interesting question to nail down on. If you
okay,
agree with me on the analysis. So I think that the big part of why, like, think of how unprecedented this is. Like, remember when me and you were in middle school? We weren't fucking, dude. I didn't know anything about politics. I wasn't paying attention. I was paying attention to any of this shit. Now, maybe I don't know if with your, identity or whatever. I don't know if you might have been more attuned to it because there were things happening, around that age. I believe when we were both in middle school around that time, uh, I think gay marriage had just been legalized like 4 years after that or like 3 or
so
4. What are you,
yeah,
30?
so
You're in your early 30s, right?
I'm 36.
Oh,
So
you're
to
36.
give you a little
Okay.
bit of reference for this, right? Do you recall what happened in 2003? This
In
was
2003,
this is the big. It was a Supreme Court ruling. So in 2003, the Supreme Court ruled in regards to sodomy laws throughout the country.
oh,
That was
okay. Yep,
just
yep,
in
yep.
2003, right?
Right.
To put that into perspective, for 2003, I was 18 years old.
Okay.
So prior to that, I believe the closest one that you're dealing with is the what happened in Hawaii when same-sex marriage that was addressed in Hawaii, which is where we eventually got DOMA from, the Defense of Marriage Act, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things were just starting to pick up more.
Right.
I will say when I was coming of age, so when I was in those, so if we're looking at the 90s, the late 90s, right? That's when you're looking at more my, going into my teens and stuff like that. There were just the whispers and just the talks of eventually focusing on marriage, right? The LGBT community, the gay community especially, was still primarily focused on the impact of the AIDS crisis and trying to get, medical help for people who needed it, medication and stuff like that. We were still dealing with the fallout of the HIV, of the AIDS crisis at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Then we started seeing a focus on issues like marriage and family. So I came of age during that time, during a shift in focus. Now I wasn't out yet at that time. I
Right.
didn't get politically involved really. I mean, I got a little bit involved during my last couple of years of high school, probably my last year, and then when I went into college, I hit the ground running. right?
Mhm.
I didn't come from a political family. My parents' views on voting, and this is honestly both their views, why bother? They're all crooked anyways. That was my parents' views on voting. I really didn't have a strong political presence. Now that doesn't mean I didn't have values present in my
Right.
life. I
Right.
like
Sure.
to draw
Sure.
that distinction because people are like, oh, well, you didn't have that, that political presence. You didn't have this party, Republican or Democrat. I'm like, no, but I had values that were
Right.
made very clear in my life.
Just because
Yeah,
you weren't watching MSNBC doesn't mean you didn't, yeah, have opinions. Sure.
exactly. It doesn't mean that I didn't have an understanding of some things or that I didn't hear things because people spoke values, even if they weren't speaking political party.
Sure.
So I did get to hear that growing up.
So
Um,
here, can I spin my
so
question to you? I got lost in
yeah, yeah,
delivering
yeah.
it.
Sorry,
So,
I think we both got a little bit
yeah.
lost there. Yeah.
So my question was, do you think like what I was talking about before, where I was saying like I don't want to put this neurosis on the children? Like I feel like it's probably already happened. Then you know what I mean? Like if there's kids in middle school that are like, oh, I want to fly the BLM flag or the pride flag. I'm so my first question is, do you think that we're at a point where politics has become so infused with culture now that that's the reason we're seeing younger and younger children having more political inoculation, so to speak, and paying more attention to the politics of the country? Or
Mm,
B, do you think it's because their material conditions and the way that the world is affecting them has pushed them into that point? That's question two. And then question three is, do you think it's a good thing or not? Do you think that this might be this new advent of uh American children anyway? Because I think that this is somewhat common in other countries now. Or it has been for a little while. I think that we might be pretty early on the forefront because I think that you know, prior to like the 90s, the political parties were really not as adversarial as they were because there were greater problems in the world. World War II, communism, there was much more
mm.
unification between parties. The divisiveness seems to be super fresh in modernity. Um, do you think that do you think it's a good thing that, if kids are becoming more politically aware at a younger age now? And, what would your prescription be? More, less?
Let me put it this way. Okay, so it's actually kind of a 2 point here. With this, do I believe that children becoming politically aware is innately a bad thing? No. But I don't want them becoming politically aware in schools and influenced by teachers who are not I don't want if that is going to happen, if that awareness is going to grow, I don't want it to be pushed by a teacher with their own personal agenda. I want it to be a discussion. Like, okay, when my husband and I have kids, right? I
Mhm.
plan to at least once a week, only once a week, because my husband would not allow me to do it more than this, because he is not very political. I would want to at the table sit down and discuss it when they got older. I'm not going to do this when they're very young. I'm not going to be doing this when they're young. I'll probably wait until they're like 14 or a little bit older. I honestly want to wait to high school. Um, where I will talk with my kids about issues and how they feel and have discussions about it. If they are aware, I won't even necessarily bring up. I was like, is there an issue that you heard about that you want to discuss? An issue that that someone talked about, a topic that you feel a certain way about and want to discuss it, whether it be political, social, so on and so forth, and have those discussions at home. Because that's another thing I think is that families don't have discussions. One of the other things that I push that's in that same vein is you often hear people say, well, at family gatherings, avoid politics and religion.
Yeah, it's
I,
stupid.
I I hate it. I hate
Yeah,
that
it's
con.
stupid.
I think it's one of the dumbest things because if you cannot find it in yourself to have a civil discussion about
Right.
something you disagree on with your own family, what hope do you have of finding that out in the real world? So I
And it
think it is
means you
one of the
probably don't know anything anywhere near as much about it as you think you do and should probably go fucking read. That's
exactly.
probably what, because I can argue the right wing position just as easily as the left. You know what I mean? I know this shit front to back. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And that's the thing. Like, if people claim that, like, oh, I know enough to be talking about this shit with other people and telling them they're wrong, it's like, well, you should know more about their position then. Like before you know what I mean? Without just being like, oh, these are all the answers and I have them and you're just wrong because you're an idiot. And it's like, well, no. Why engage in political discussion if you aren't willing to actually listen to people? And
And part of that
I
is,
agree.
like you said, being aware of it. So even if, for example, my child, there's got to be a game even of the devil's advocate, right? If my child expresses an opinion that I agree with, I should be aware, or at least become aware of the opposing argument, and bring that and then discuss that opposing argument with my child. So to go back to your question, it's not that I think it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. I just like if a child is to delve into this in any sense, I think it should be coming first from the home, discussions about it. It should not be coming from the school. It should not be a teacher pushing their narrative. We have and I know you're going to say it's the few examples, but it's still stuff. And mind you, what happened as a result, I do agree with, and I think that says something as well. We had a few instances. For example, I don't know if you recall hearing about that teacher in California who removed the American flag. Now, this isn't asking so much about your opinion on the Pledge of Allegiance. It's just what her approach was. She removed the American flag in her classroom because she was uncomfortable with it. She put up the pride flag, and when it came to do Pledge of Allegiance, one of the students, he asked her, "Where am I supposed to look? Where am I supposed to play? What am I supposed to do?" She said, "There is a flag for you to pledge your allegiance to." And he looked around and she's like, "Yeah, the pride flag."
Holy shit. So that's just a crank though, bro. That's just a crank teacher.
No,
That's what I'm saying, though. That's just a crank. That lady's crazy, bro.
She proudly put this out there on TikTok or whatnot. But she was crazy, right? Then there was another teacher. There was another teacher who was speaking very proudly of radicalizing youth. Like he actually made it a point to give them assignments to radicalize them. Right? He proudly stated this. Then you actually,
Now, have you seen the recent Ben Shapiro video where he's like talking to fucking like third graders and telling them like, "Oh, these leftist ideas are dumb and my ideas are right"? Have you seen that? Because
that one I haven't seen. I've seen
he just put it out like a week ago. It's really weird, and I was like, "Well, wait, this is like what the right says the left does, and then you're doing it." Like,
and I do have.
Is it okay because you're doing it? Like,
no.
So you gotta go watch it.
I will go watch it because I will. Yeah, I watch Daily Wire. I watch Ben Shapiro. I watch Matt Walsh. I watch I watch all of them as well. Personally, I like Andrew Klavan. Andrew Klavan. Andrew Klavan is on the Daily Wire as well. He only does his shows on Saturdays, and he's funny. He's very nuanced in a way. He is a man of faith. But he actually grew up in Hollywood. He grew up around the stars and the celebrities. His father was involved in Hollywood and everything. And his journey is very interesting. And something that's a lot of people probably wouldn't be aware of with the Daily Wire is Andrew Klavan. He's a man of great faith. His son, Spencer Klavan, has his own stream. And he's an openly gay man. And he's actually marrying the lawyer for the Daily Wire. The lawyer that represents the Daily Wire, like their primary lawyer that they reference, is actually marrying Andrew Klavan's son. He's marrying his son.
I don't know as much about the Daily. I do know a ton about Breitbart, and the inception of Breitbart is super interesting story.
Yeah, but I feel I went a little bit off on that with that. So I will watch that because here is the thing: is that I agree with you, and this is where I said is that one of the things that frustrates me isn't not necessarily that someone has an opinion. Opinion that differs with my own, that's not innately frustrating. What frustrates me is when someone has a perspective, has an opinion, and then they're a course of logic, and then they're very selective on how they apply that logic. That aggravates me. I'll admit it. It's my trigger. Trigger warning.
I just want people to let children be kids for a little while.
Exactly, I do.
I feel like our society already we're robbing children of childhood already.
We are. We are greatly robbing them of their childhood.
I'm not comfortable with that, man.
I mean, we had drag. It's funny because we know that. I think that's a little bit of response to the right's response to drag story time. hour,
Right.
and all that crap is happening. And to be
Well,
honest,
here's my thing with stuff like that. It's like I get what people's argument is. Like I get where people are coming from with like the drag thing or some other stuff because they're like, hey, we're just trying to show kids like we're people too. And I sympathize with that. I understand that because I shouldn't say I understand that because I don't. I didn't. I haven't lived that experience, but I get why. I can understand why people think that that's like healing or whatever. That's cool, but when we're talking about like politics, because I don't think that people's identities or anything like that are inherently political. I think they're political in the way that we discuss them in the discourse. But I don't think like someone being gay or drag or being a drag queen or like being trans or whatever. Like I feel like a lot of people talk about that. Like those people just like going and talking to kids or whatever. Like, no, you're politicizing it because you think that their identity is politics. And it's like, well, no, they're just a person. And if that's what they do, that's what they do.
mhm,
I think it's only political like once they start talking about politics. You know what I mean? Like I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with like a trans woman like talking to kids and doing story time or something like that. You know what I mean? But I get I get why people pump the brakes. I get it because it's so viscerally different from what everyone's used to. And I think that a large part of what a lot of this culture clash that, like the base topic of what we're talking about today, I think it comes from just the acceleration of how fast a lot of new things are being injected into the culture. And that's honestly, again, like my main argument for why it's like, hey, we probably shouldn't do CRT type stuff for young kids because it's like, look at how bad we adults are dealing with this acceleration. Like, we can't handle it. Don't do it to kids, man. Don't do it to kids. Please, for the love of fucking God. My brain's exploding on a daily basis. I can't keep up with any of this shit. And I'm like plugged in. And
so
no one agrees. Like, why would
yeah,
you do this to children? I don't understand. I really don't get it because it's like they can't even comprehend. These are complex. There's tons of adults that can't comprehend this shit.
yeah.
You
So I
you
then
need
I
you
know
need a
some,
whole historical context and basis
yeah,
of understanding of global race relations, this country's developmental course that isn't in a fucking K through 12 history book. Like, let's keep it real. You know what I mean? Like, even kids K through 12, unless you're in like a private school or some super advanced course where they have you reading like specific things, like even coming out of K through 12, you don't really understand slavery. You know what I mean? Like you don't understand like the abhorrence of how horrible and terrifying like the rape and the like you don't hear about that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't hear
mm,
about that. And that's such a visceral thing where it's like, and again, I'm not saying don't teach it to kids. I'm just making the
yeah,
point of like how old do you actually have to be? Like it's the reason like the voting age is 18. You know what I mean? Like that's
yeah.
arguably why. It's
So
because it's like you aren't old enough to understand a lot of this complex shit. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about it or engage with it. But in my opinion, it definitely means like just like you said, regardless, you shouldn't have an adult, regardless of what side of the political spectrum they're coming from, forming those things for you. Yeah, I don't agree with that. You know what I mean? We're
so
not we're not talking about chemistry here. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. So one of the things I support, and I honestly, I like I said, while I come at a lot, I come at things, in general. Yeah, well, you know, I'm a conservative. Obviously, I'm going to have that bias, and that's another thing is acknowledging that we all have our natural bias. We can try to educate ourselves on the opposite perspective and try to see their side, but innately, we're still going to have that bias in regards to our core values, right? So when I look at this, I try to look at approaches that I think would benefit all of us. And one of them, it is primarily being pushed by conservatives right now, but it's the idea of curriculum transparency. So a
mm,
requirement that the curriculum for the semester, for the school year, be available for parents to easily access it, see what materials their children are viewing, what they're reading, what they're being told, and I don't see anything wrong with that. I
mm,
support that approach. However, there's what was it? I think it was. I feel horrible because I'm forgetting which one it was. I think it's out of Florida. There was a let me bring it up. So it's basically what it is. We're dealing with a law that allows parents to take legal actions if their child is taught a specific subject at a younger age in the younger schools. I very much support this. I have friends that do not, and I wound up in a very, very long back and forth on my page.
We're talking about civil legal action, right?
So yeah, that they could take legal action against the school and sue it. So bear with me one moment. I think it's something that's worth at least touching on, especially because we're focusing on education.
Yeah, we'll probably wrap up education.
Yeah,
after this.
we'll wrap it up after that. Okay, so this is and I have to look up more recently development on it myself. This is HB 1557 out of Florida. So basically, what this does, just to read a little bit, it's an act relating to parental rights in education, amending. So what it does, requiring district school boards to adopt procedures that comport with certain provisions of law for notifying a student's parent of specified informations, requiring such procedures to reinforce the fundamental right of a parent to make decisions regarding the upbringing and control of their children. So the concerns being expressed about this is, like, for example, that this is then requiring a teacher. So if a child comes to a teacher and feels comfortable enough to, and I'm bringing up one specific argument that came at me from someone I know, was that if a child tells a teacher that they're gay or trans, this is being seen as a bill that would force a teacher to out the child to their parent. But when you actually read the entire
text,
it
has nothing to do with the curriculum, though. So
no. When you read the entire text, you see that it actually says that teachers can still take into account if they feel that a child's home environment will be a danger to them in regards to addressing a situation.
Didn't the first couple sentences say like curriculum though? That has nothing to do with.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that so.
Like that would be legally
I will
binding.
actually send it to you to read the entire thing. I will send it to you to read the entire thing. So teachers, okay, so the big issue is how this can come across. Like, for example, it does get tricky if a school, for example, were to have a course where it was a history course that would touch on LGBT history, right? Because it specifically, and I'll send it to you so you can actually read it. It specifically is regarding children learning about sexuality, which I support. I don't think that I don't agree with the sexualizing of our children. I don't agree with introducing them necessarily to confusing ideas in regards to, like, the idea that, well, at this young age, you are in a place that if you want to, to make the decision that you can change your gender. That you may have been born a boy, but you can identify as a girl. Teachers influencing that, absolutely not. I do not support. But it's interesting because the law strictly forbids referencing to sexuality when it comes to that in academia for young children. However, say for example you were to teach a course about New York State history, right, and civil rights. You would eventually, if you were really teaching a broad course, you'd have to at some point touch on the Stonewall riots in 1969. You'd have to, right? If you were really having a thorough course in that regard. Now, if you bring up the Stonewall riots, you have to bring up what it was about, what it was connected to. Now, what we're dealing with is a gay bar, right? So then, if you're dealing with a gay bar, is there then a requirement to obviously describe what gay is then, if you were to teach that class? That is where it gets murky, because then if a teacher were to say, well, gay is when two people of the same sex are attracted to each other and so on and so forth, that's where the law would come into play in regards to where curriculum is concerned. And so that that to me is one of those things. Overall, I actually do support the law, because I think that because the law specifically mentions, though, it doesn't mention high school. This pertains to middle school, elementary school. That is what this law pertains to. So that's why I support it.
I was gonna say, what if you're in high school and like you're reading about Oedipus having sex with his mom? Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's sexuality.
That's the thing. Is like, It's funny because this is where I've had a discussion with a few
You know
conservatives,
what
right?
I
Because
mean? Like,
I've had a lot of conservatives saying, even my high school student, I don't want them, I don't want them reading, this sexual material and all that stuff. I'm like, I remember when I was in high school, and I was earlier in high school, we read the book Cujo. I don't know. Did you ever read the book Cujo?
no, I haven't.
There is a very, I don't recall it being in the movie. There is a very aggressive sex scene between a husband and his wife, to where he takes her, and she does end up feeling pleasure from it, but she experiences a climax, but she remains silent because her husband is an abusive man, and she's not even sure if he's aware that a woman can feel that.
Right.
That
So
is in the book.
so it was a rape scene you read in high school.
It
Right.
pretty much, even the like
I was gonna
it's
say, I remember the craziest book I read was A Child Called It, and I think I read that
oh,
in like 8th grade, and I remember like how like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I think this is a bad thing. I think that it like, it brought a lot of reading about the horrible traumatization of that child, all the abuse, the beating, I remember like feeling bad about that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. That's a kid reads stuff like that, like a rape scene or a horrible abuse of a small child, or a flaying of a slave on a plantation, something like that. And you hope that it evinces the correct emotion. You know what I mean? I get why people balk at things like that, but I think that, like I was an English major in college. I didn't finish college, but I think that, and I'm a big reader. I still read. I read fucking an insane amount, novels, series, all kinds of shit. And I think that, that stuff has an important place for a select group of people who like, are empathic readers like that, where you can take a lot from that. And that's my only concern is like, there's a lot of like risky shit probably that people just like reflexively don't think is a good idea for children to read at all. But it's like, if there's some people who will find some value in that, like, I don't know. It's just hard. I'm not really a fan of like blanket policy. You know what I mean? And if it's specifically saying like, oh, we don't want books or teachers teaching about sexuality and gender or like whatever else. I mean, it feels weird to me. It feels weird because it's like, what again, it goes back to, if kids are already like, I feel like a lot of this all presupposes that like kids aren't on the internet, which we're being wild to act like they aren't already coming across. Like, there's a reason why there were like, kids got politicized from like, I would say 2015 on, because, Bernie was in the culture, Trump was in the culture, like it was cool, it was on Instagram, it was on Snapchat, like they were all exposed to that shit already anyway. So like, it might be in a futile conversation we're even having about this shit. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I wasn't 14 in
I
2016. But the point that I'm making is, regardless of whatever a teacher does in school, I think that it's a very similar argument around like people who tried to make the arguments for, and still do, for abstinence education in school rather than sex ed. And it's like, well, there's like clear data that doesn't work. Like, if your goal is like, oh, we're going to teach them like, don't have sex, you're not ready, you're not an adult. And then like, okay, like teen pregnancy rates are mad high. And not saying that sex ed has, I think it's very dubious. There's been a lot of studies that show in specific cities and counties that it has had some effect, whatever else. But I think at the very least, education on like sexually transmitted diseases is very important. You know what I mean? Like, I think stuff like that, like bringing some realism to kids of a certain age. And I think it's proper to start that around 14, 15, to be like, hey, just so you know, like, you're gonna like feel some stuff and maybe have sex,
yeah.
but your dick might fall off. Like, just so you know. I think that's super important. You know what I mean? Like, and I think some of this has some crossover. I know it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's like,
Yeah.
for kids to understand, like, hey, this is a crazy world out here. There's a lot of people feel really strongly about some things. And I think it is sort of irresponsible of us as adults now to sit here and act like it would be one thing if there was a perfectly safe world and environment out there where kids didn't need to engage or know about any of these things. But like, let's keep it real, bro. Like Charlottesville, like political violence. I referenced it, that last poll that came out of Reuters, where it was like 6 or 7% of Americans think political violence is justifiable to reach their ends. Like, we're in a different fucking era right now. You know what I mean? Like, so it's hard. Like, I don't have the answer. I'm not saying like yay or nay, but it's just like there's a lot of evidence on either side where it's like, fuck, is this good or not? Like, I don't know. Like, should they know this fucking Wild West world that we've created for them? Because we created this. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
we created this. Is it really the best thing for a kid to not, it's what I argue with my wife all the time. Like, she's very a Montessori school base, like free range parenting, all of this kind of stuff. And I push back on some of it where it's like, well, no, you got to teach your kid. Like, I don't want them to like take orders from me and like, oh, I'm an authoritarian and that's the reason why you need to listen to me. It's like, no, they need to understand, like, to be a chameleon in this life, to get, before you get to the point where you're the boss and you get to do what you want to do, you're going to have to be able to mentally
Mhm.
compartmentalize enough to have someone else maybe be a little aggressive towards you. Like,
Yeah.
you have to be able to deal with this shit. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
feel like that's the biggest part of what education is. It's you're preparing people to deal with the fucked up world they're going to get released into very shortly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
Like,
I feel like I'm about to simplify it with this, because actually there's a memory that I have very specifically of my mother teaching me something when I was younger, telling me no. So thing is, we do fall into a trend where we just give our children commands, and to an extent, it can be for their benefit. We do things that for their benefit. However, I do think that if a child is capable of grasping it, I'm not saying when you say no to, like, when you make a decision regarding like a 2-year-old, you explain the fine details of it to the 2-year-old necessarily. But it does make me think of an interaction I had with my mother when I was younger. I went to I reach up because she had put the kettle on to heat the water so I could have cocoa, and I reached up to get the kettle,
mhm,
and my mother grabbed my hand and said, "No, you do not do that." And that was when my mother could have stopped it there. She could have been like, "No, you do not do that. You do not touch that." Right? That would have been a very specific, just telling me that I don't do that action. That's something
mhm,
I'm not supposed to do. My mother proceeded to tell me and explain to me why I shouldn't do that. That I could get burnt and hurt myself and need to go to the hospital
mhm,
and all that stuff. So, there. I feel like what we need is that approach. There is when we are going to address a an issue with our children. If they're capable, if they're capable of understanding it, of grasping the details of it, then yeah, we should have more conversation. When it comes to sex ed, for example, when it comes to sex in general, I get very frustrated with sex education with some of my friends. They believe we should have 5-year-olds learning about sex education, and I stand so
it's a
strongly
waste
against
of
that.
time. They don't have the
Yeah,
emotional capacity to
it's
even know what the fuck
exactly.
you're talking about.
Exactly. But if a child asks, hears something, or has a curiosity and asks their parent, my approach with children is if they ask a question, answer the question. But you can answer it in a way that you don't need to go in depth. My sister put me in an odd situation once, and I find interesting when I talk to conservatives about this situation as well, especially. Um, my sister, I'm the token gay in the family, of course. So my sister asked me to tell her children, to explain to two of her children, what gay was, and they're young.
Mhm,
I wasn't interacting with a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, or anything like that. Um, so she asked me to do it. Um, but I was like, at first I wasn't going to, but I was like, okay, maybe I should take this approach, because if she asks someone else to do it or she attempts to do it, she
right,
might give more detail or do something that I honestly don't agree with, such as explaining a sexual act, which I absolutely would not agree with.
right. You get to be the wizard behind the curtain.
Yeah. So basically the approach I took was I was like, okay, do you know what love is, right? When people love. Do you know? And this, I hate when people just say, explain gay as when a man loves a man, because that can confuse a child, because you have a little boy who loves their male friend, right? Or a
Mhm.
little girl who loves their female friend. Does that mean they're gay? No, that's not what that means. How I explained it to them, I remember I was like, you know how mommy and daddy have that special love that parents have, that special love that's mommy and daddy, and it's between them. Sometimes two adults that are both men or both women can also have that same love.
Mm.
That was how I explained it, and I stopped it there, and it satisfied. And that was the thing. There was no need to go into any kind of detail. I
Right.
explained it from a position where there was not even the mention of sex. There was no need to mention to that because I'm dealing with, at the time, I think they were 10 and 9.
Right.
So there was no need. So that was my approach. And I also used to speak at a local college. There was a professor who would have me come in to speak about the history of the LGBT community. And now this is an interesting take that I had with that, where I disagreed. How I approached it. The reason I said yes was because of his reasoning behind it. Because I was like, well, anyone can actually speak about the LGBT community. This is one thing that annoys me, is that you need to be of the identity to speak of the issue. No,
Sure.
anyone can educate themselves on the history of something. Anyone, gay, straight, whatever, can educate themselves on LGBT history. When it comes to Black history, anyone, white, Black, can educate
But
themselves on that
but the
history. They
people
can read the
listening
book.
don't want that.
But
That's the
that was the
thing.
thing, though, is that
Yeah, nobody wants
no,
to
no,
hear an old white
no,
guy talk about
no. I'm just saying, though, is
modern
that
Black
what
history.
annoys me, though, is that belief that you have to be a certain thing
Sure.
to speak about a certain thing. That is very prevalent, at least in my experience on the left, right? At least my from what I've interacted with. So I had a discussion with him, and he made it clear that no, that wasn't why. He wasn't asking me just because of the history of it. He also wanted a lived experience of it. So that was, that was part of that discussion. So I was like, all right. So mind you, at this time in my life was transformative. I was embracing more of my conservative values. So I feel like they definitely, when I was speaking to the college students, they definitely got an interesting, a different take than I feel they would have from another speaker. But there was one instance, and this brings us full circle, and I know we can wrap up because we've been going for a while, where the professor reached
I
out to
want to
me.
go to the next topic.
Okay, sorry. Okay, then I'll wrap this up. So the professor reached out to me, and he asked me. He there was a program where young children, so looking at more like around the ages of between 10, I think he said it was like 10 to 12 to 13-year-olds, could sign up for a program. Their parents gave them permission, where they'd experience a college course or a college lecture.
Mhm.
And he wanted these children to experience one on the LGBT community. So he asked me to do it, and I was conflicted. It's similar to how I was with my sister. But then I thought about it, and I'm like, and I know some people will be pissed off by this, but I'm like, okay, is it better that I do it? Because I understand, at least from my perspective, I see that there's a certain approach that needs to be taken with children. We shouldn't be using certain language. You shouldn't be putting certain concepts in their mind so young. So should I take it or leave it up to, if you get someone else and they're just going to go full bore in, they're just going to go, as graphic or whatever, and not care. So I decided to do it. And my approach was from a historical perspective. I simply asked questions. I was like, okay, so has anyone ever heard of Stonewall? That was actually my first approach. And I came at it from a history. I was basically just speaking about facts. And if they asked me a question, I would address the question. But I did everything to not be like, okay, I'm going to guide this child this way or that way. And I felt a great responsibility. And it was interesting because afterwards the professor was like, oh, I wanted you to go more harder on this stuff, like really, and I was like, this is the approach that I felt was acceptable for children this age. It's just, I don't believe that any other detail. I don't think it's right to go in that direction. So I think that's when it comes to education, is the approach we have got to have is what's appropriate for children. And I think for me, I guess the last thing I want to wrap up with is something that I know you seem to agree on, is transparency when it comes to curriculum. I really think that will go a good distance in helping at least address this growing conflict that we do see in schools. if parents are more engaged, are made more aware of what their children are learning, who knows? Maybe the parent will even look more into it as well. And there can be greater discussions between the parents and kids, because right now I feel we're divided. I feel like there is, and like I said, I know I'm dividing this along those lines, but it comes from the left. I have a lot of friends. I know it's anecdotal, but you also see it in politicians that parents should have a limited involvement in deciding what their children learn. We saw this
Yeah.
right there in Virginia
I
stated
just
but by a
my
candidate for
thing with
governor.
it is once we start getting to the state legislative level with shit like that, with where you're in, honestly, the Republican Party has had quite the push in the last like 18 months, around, I won't get into it too heavy here, but like, basically de facto banning abortion by letting people go, pursue civil suits. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of litigation. You know what I mean? If communities, specifically, we're talking about school boards and, counties and school systems, I think that if you can't solve those problems on that level, if you can't have enough of a groundswell to change your own local politics, having the state step in to do it is just as bad as right wingers who complain about the Fed stepping in on states. I don't think it's any different. I don't agree with that. But what I will say
So
is, just to button up this topic overall is, while I do agree with you on, what everything I spoke on before and about the age of children and things like that, I do not disagree with a lot of the historical analysis that is inside of the CRT. And I think that that's where we're having a big disconnect on the left and the right. Is you might have some folks like me where, I don't agree with, hey, it shouldn't be at this age, or it shouldn't be this bellicose on, like, oh, people need to feel guilty and all that. No, I don't. I have a problem with that. But when we're talking about like the historical context, like you said, talking about facts of, hey, this is what happened in this country. Hey, this is just so happened to be the way that shit played out across the last couple hundred years. I think that there's a lot of people on the right who have a problem with even just that being spoken. So like there's layers of this. Just like me and you were having this conversation right
yeah.
now, where it's like, okay, like we differ, we have a bunch of overlap on things we agree on. There's a lot of folks, and you're talking about Florida and Texas, that just don't want people being taught about racism. I mean, this goes back. This has been an issue with, for example, the Texas school system and their book printing and things like that. Like this is an issue that's been ongoing in the South for a long time now, and that's honestly, in my opinion, why you see this is sort of like the biggest area in the country where a lot of these CRT fights are happening. Obviously, you see like extreme heightened examples of it in places like California, super liberal bastions, where you have complete fucking cranks trying to like teach a 5-year-old like about how they can like turn into a boy. Like, yeah, that's obviously a wild example, and I don't agree with that either. But I think that there's a lot of underlying long-term issues here around education and things that just haven't been told, just true history that hasn't been told at all in a lot of Southern schools that do this on purpose, that I feel like is getting swept under the rug, and CRT is a very useful blanket to cover those toys. I think that is happening a lot to some degree here too. It's been severely overlooked, to the point
So
where, what's that?
yeah, no. So let me finish wrapping up your point, and then I just wanted to touch on one thing with that, and then I figured we'd move on, because I actually got
Yeah,
an
yeah,
idea
no, no,
what we can
no. Like
talk
I
now.
said,
Talk about next, since you mentioned it.
I'm just saying, like
Hello,
we're sort of like under the umbrella of sort of talking
hello.
about a lot of. Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, I
You
lost you
froze.
for a bit. You were buffering.
Okay, yeah, I got you. I heard your audio. Your audio is good on the recording.
Okay.
No, I just like I said, I think that under the auspice of the big cultural fights that we've been happening, that have
Hmm.
been happening right now in the discourse very recently, it's sort of sweeping under the rug just by presence of, like, it's just displacing a lot of the other huge issues in education that have existed, that were pushed by the right. You know what I mean? Like, let's not forget that, a lot of things have changed sides here. In the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s, you had a lot of right-wing folks, a lot of right-wing groups being like, oh, we need to put like advisory labels on albums and video games and blah blah blah. And a lot of people on the left have sort of assumed that position now, where they're like, censor Joe Rogan, censor this thing, censor that,
Trigger
give this,
warnings.
give the yeah,
Safe
trigger warning. No,
spaces.
I agree. A lot of things have flipped. And just like right now, how on the CRT, there's a lot of right wingers outraged about what's going on in the education system. That was on the shoe was on the other foot not that long ago, except a lot of those problems didn't get ameliorated. Where we're talking about completely false history being taught to a lot of kids, or just large omissions. And the last thing I want to cap off with the CRT discussion on is my biggest problem with the critical race theory, like in and of itself, like regardless of its teaching at what level of age or what level of education, is you cannot, and I said this on my last podcast, I'll say this again just in case anyone didn't hear the last one, you cannot develop a theory the way that they did to try to explain the position or the outcomes of what has happened to minorities in this country, specifically Black people, or apply this analysis anywhere globally on a completely social basis. That's ridiculous. I have a huge problem with CRT simply because it applies zero class analysis. And I'm not going to make this about an economic thing because we're steering purposefully away from that. But I think that it's irresponsible for any group of people from the left or the right to try to analyze in a historical context an entire 2-century spanning period of time in any country to talk about the outcomes of where groups of people are now compared to what happened to them because of slavery or any other reason, and then apply zero class analysis. That's literally super irresponsible, fucking insane, because not only does it not apply the class analysis for Black folks, it doesn't apply the class analysis for why a lot of those things happen politically near the time of abolition, and why the political dynamics at the time, why you had a significant portion of white abolitionists and things like that. It doesn't explore any of these things because those are all exclusively class inherent issues, where a lot of abolitionists weren't bleeding heart liberals and stuff. They straight up were like, I don't want to compete with slavery. That's something that, again, CRT does not address. Most of our historical context in this country does not address. And I'm not saying this because, like, oh, I'm a Marxist and I think everything should be economics, but it's like, no, it's a huge missing piece. You can't talk about these things with it. That was my biggest gripe with all the history that I learned in K through 12, and some of what I learned in college is, now that I've expanded, the internet has done it for me. It's given me the ability to listen to more people who get more ingrained and more in depth and get more granular on the political factions at certain times in history, whether it's this country or another. Is you really get to understand that the materialist motivations for a lot of these different groups played a role. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, the South and the North, you had abolitionists, you had people who believed that slavery was a God-given right, things like that. But you to ignore the economics of it, and I don't just mean the economics systematically. I'm talking about, again, the people who, poor white folk who had to compete with slave labor. Like, that's important. And obviously the way free black folk felt about that, or the slaves themselves. But again, when you completely leave out a materialist analysis and just completely look at the concept of CRT across a 2-century span history of America, and only look at it from like, oh, well, this is what they did in the law and how it seeped into and created the outcomes we live in today. It's like, okay, but that's ridiculous, because you can't not talk about the materialist conditions of the different factions of political power in this country, and why they did what they did, and why the law got made how it was, and the deals that were made because of those material conditions and the concerns of those different political factions. That's why I think, hey, just throw the whole fucking thing out, because it's incomplete. It's ridiculous. It's like trying to teach a fucking course in college about how to put rockets into space without teaching gravity. It's ridiculous. It's incomplete. It's incomplete. And that's just my opinion, but hey, who the fuck am I? I'm not a historian, but I think it makes perfect sense.
I guess just to touch on that, what I do support is facts and what we know to be facts, right? And also data. I'm a data-driven man myself, like yourself. However, I think a big part of analyzing data is acknowledging a few things. First of all, where the data is coming from, who's collecting it, samples, all that stuff, I think, is something that's important that needs to be addressed when it comes to data. One example for that is having been involved in the community, I would get a lot of surveys regarding discrimination, trying to collect that data. One of their questions would be, do you feel that you've been discriminated against? Mind you, in my reference, it would be as a gay man. And I was like, that's a very odd question. Someone like, I don't think that is a good question. Do you feel? It's like, it should be, do you know? Do you have a specific example of when you were discriminated against? I think that's more direct, because we can feel a lot of things. I had one friend who was swearing to me that his coworker hated him for being gay. Like, he wanted to go to HR, and I asked him, has this coworker said anything homophobic? Has he called you any kind of name? Right? He's like, well, any homophobic name, any name in reference to your sexuality. He goes, no, but I know he's talking behind my back and he called me an asshole. And I said to my friend, I'm like, I love you, we are friends, but you are an asshole. So the idea, though, is that because my friend took it as this person not liking him for being gay, mind you, I wasn't at his job. I didn't get a feel for that. But if he had gotten that survey, he would have said, yes, I've been discriminated against. I experienced homophobia. So back to education, data needs to be more detailed, and we need to address data if we're going to utilize that, especially when it comes to the education of our children.
But let me ask you, what have you ever felt that someone on the left did not like you but never said it just because you're a Republican? Have you never felt that? Because I felt that.
Yep. I have.
Okay, so how's that any different?
Feeling something isn't proof. Feelings aren't proof. Feelings aren't
facts. Not about.
That's
it was a survey, though. But that's my point. It's a survey. It's not a court of law. You have to prove things in court. In a survey, you can just say yes or no.
This is where I'm consistent, is I want data that comes from as specific sources as possible and detailed sources as possible.
Right, but what I'm saying is, in your instance, your only way of proof of discrimination would be if it happened in a legal proceeding, because otherwise the only way you can gather that data is to ask someone. That's my point. That's what I'm saying. Like, unless it's like a litigated instance of discrimination or racism, there's no other way to prove that with data. That's why you ask people things.
That's also the idea, though, to have an understanding that some things, unless you have proof, like, for example, even if they had said that, yes, I was called this name, okay, that's at least some more legitimate. That doesn't require any legal course there. If someone is like, okay, I experienced this name being, thrown at me in reference to this aspect of my identity. Okay, that's an answer to the question. I can at least accept that. But you telling me you feel something, and I felt that. I felt that people haven't liked me for being gay for various reasons. I have felt that. Every fiber in my being told me that was the case, but I also had to acknowledge that feeling it isn't proving it. So that's the detail. Now, if I could say that person called me a name, okay, that's something towards that feeling, that favors that feeling. So even that being a requirement, asking, in this instance, were you called a name in reference to this aspect of your identity, this component of your identity? That would at least give me more detail, more validity to the data, in my opinion. So, I
think asking the question as posing it as "do you feel" is meant to evince more candor from the person answering the survey. I think that's the point behind it. Because if you look into the psychology behind polling and surveys like that, it's a lot of the questions are geared in specific ways. And don't get me wrong, like, I know about push polling and I get what you're saying. You're like, there's a lot of leading questions that push people to answer in a specific way. I understand that completely. But if you're not talking about electoralism, you're just talking about like general surveys like that, that's sort of the point. The point is to see
lead the discussions that we have, though.
Right, but the point is to understand the point is to understand the ceiling of people who felt that way, so you can have an idea of where you're at. Like, you want a range. You want, okay, this is the bottom range. There is the actual instances of discrimination that have been litigated, and then where's the ceiling? It's this many people respond that they feel that way.
Then. Be honest about it.
But I'm just saying.
No. I'm talking about the data collectors.
But what I'm saying,
I think you're mistaking what I'm saying here.
I'm not mistaking what you're saying. What I'm saying is, I feel like you're not fundamentally understanding the purpose of why people pose those questions that way. They do it that way because they're actually trying to take the temperature of how people feel. They're not trying to find, what's the exact numerical number of instances of discrimination. That's not the point. Those types of surveys are geared specifically that way to try to understand civil unrest. They're trying to understand how people feel. That's literally the point. That's the point.
So I
because
feel what would
Kevin,
go
at the end of the day,
further to addressing that,
the
though,
analytical
would be
the
the
analytical
specific
data
data.
of however much discrimination is or isn't happening doesn't matter. This is the same thing we talked about in the last episode.
It does. Facts matter. Reality
No.
matters.
I understand,
Reality
but
matters.
let me finish my point.
Feelings are not reality.
Let me finish my point. Feelings are what
Okay.
creates reality and what drives people to do things. You're trying to predict what will happen because of how people feel. It's irrelevant of what has actually happened. Just like it's irrelevant of how people, 50%, what is it, like over 60% of the Republican Party insists still to this day that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him, that they feel that. That's not true. There's no proof. There's no analytical data proving that. They feel that way. Why is that important? Because that will lead them to do things. That's why. That's why. If 80% of Black Americans feel like police have it out for them, they're going to act and do different shit. You want to know that. You don't want to know how many of you Black people have actually been discriminated against in a provable way by a cop. What the fuck does that help? We already have the data for that. Because that's already in the books.
No.
You want to understand how people. You want to understand how
conflated.
people feel about things because it's a predictive analytical.
The data gets
component.
conflated. The data gets conflated, though, because I had discussions with friends where we would talk about discrimination or something like that, and they would give me data, and they'll give me surveys, whatever, and I'll go and look at it. I'll be like, no, this doesn't prove. This doesn't give me substance. This gives me feelings, and I'm like, for our discussion, I need substance, and that's the thing is because we do. Reality still matters because if we get caught up in feelings, then we are screwed. We are royally screwed if all that's driving us is how we feel about the topics in our lives. We are royally screwed.
But you do understand the base. You do understand the base political reason.
That's the thing.
No. But what I'm saying is you understand the base political reason for why you're wrong, though, right? Because feelings do matter because that's all people have left. We do not. And no one feels like they have any control over their democracy anymore. That's why it's important because it's true. The fucking veil's been removed. We all understand on a national level, a lot of the things that are happening, no one actually fucking wants. Look at the public policy polling on like
exactly,
every fucking major legislation.
They're real.
Nobody wants this shit. Nobody wants this shit. That's my point.
They're happening. They're real. I think this is the thing is like, it doesn't mean I dismiss feelings. I want to make it clear. I don't dismiss feelings like altogether. Obviously I don't. I know I feel many ways about many subjects. But at the end of the day, I step back from my feelings and say, are my feelings a reflection of the reality? That is what I think needs to be stressed. That's my problem, is that we're all about we're becoming a feels country, right? It's about what I feel, left and right, to be honest, in many ways. There are about what you feel, what I feel here. But when two people are arguing about their feelings, about what they feel, I don't think that's productive. But like they argue about,
it makes them feel good though. It's productive for them.
It makes them feel good, but what direction does it move us in?
But it's productive for them.
Is it really productive? Did they walk away from it with an understanding of reality or just an understanding of their feelings and reinforcement of their feelings? That's the question.
It gives them an outlet to speak about how they feel outside of their internal monologue. Yeah, it does provide something to people.
That's fine. But I care about what's more productive in the long run of building off from facts and the reality of the world around us. That's where we get into this thing. So, I mean, if we're going to go off feelings, then why not allow a 5-year-old to transition if it's about feelings? They feel they're the opposite sex. They believe it.
I don't agree with it. But
exactly, which is wrong. Which is why I disagree with this. Which is why I disagree with this feeling-based approach to our culture.
I disagree with you.
I find it dangerous. No, like I want to make clear, I understand where you were coming from and why those surveys are shaped that way. What I'm saying is I disagree with them being shaped that way. You understand? You get?
Sure, but it's a big leap. It's a big leap from asking people, hey, Black guy, have you ever felt discriminated in this town you live in? And then, hey, 5-year-old, do you feel like you're a girl? That's a huge gap.
The premise, the root is feelings. The root is feelings, and the root is feelings.
One thing actually has public policy that you can affect that through, and then one doesn't. That's why you can stop the 5-year-old from getting transition surgery. You can't stop the Black guy
feeling like he's
discriminated against.
For now, you can.
Bro,
For now,
there is.
you may be able,
I
for
don't think
now
there's
you
as
can,
much
but
popularity for that as people make it out to be. I really don't, man. I've never
and there
met
wasn't a lot of
anyone.
popularity once for my marriage, but look at me today, right? All right, so I do
But
want to
that's because
focus. I know,
you're a grown adult. You're not. You chose to get married. That's the difference. I don't think a
but we're
large portion of
moving
this country is
further.
ever going to be
Okay,
comfortable
do,
enough to
have
let a
you
doctor
read?
put a
Are
knife
you aware
to
of
a
maps? Can I
5-year-old.
ask you a
I
question? Are
don't
you aware
think
of
that.
maps? Are you aware of the term maps? Are you aware of recent situations regarding college professors and their approach to pedophilia?
No, no.
Okay,
What's
so I
wait?
follow
I
this
thought
very
we were gonna
closely.
pivot off education,
Okay,
man.
yes, we will
It's
pivot. So let's pivot. I want to pivot. All right, I want to
we
pivot.
got to get off of
We can
this.
do another whole stream on that. But it's just I see the dangers in the future, so I'm very much about nipping it in the butt and cutting out the cancer early. But let's pivot because you mentioned something that I did want to jump onto. Then I didn't write it down as one of the topics, but I think it's going to be an issue that's going to be very divisive, especially depending on how everything turns out in June. I think it's going to impact. We're going to see that in November. So I'm curious to see how the politicians respond to it. Obviously,
Mhm.
we had abortion come before the Supreme Court again, right?
Well, yeah, it's about to
And
in like what less than 30 days,
oh no,
right?
the arguments already came before the
Right.
Supreme Court.
But the
We already
rulings,
had
yeah.
the arguments over the law there. It was specifically it's the Mississippi law. Yeah.
And you had about
So,
5 states just rush in a bunch of legislation in just the last 30 days
mm,
or like 35, 40 to try to add their blitz their shit through as well. Yeah.
you know. So I mean, but we're also dealing with a more direct. So we're dealing with a more direct challenge that in regards to Roe v. Wade. And June is when we'll hear more. We will hear the rulings on stuff. So the thing is for me, I have experienced. I don't know what your experience has been, but I've seen abortion becoming a more divisive issue than it has in the past and polarizing even among circles where traditionally it wasn't. I know for me, I'll be honest, my own position on that is that I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life, and I will admit I've become more aggressively pro-life as a result. So I guess where I want to approach you, because I've heard a few people express opinions about this. So I'm going to throw it to you. Do you see abortion as a possible truly divisive cultural issue that will have obviously more of those political ramifications in a more drastic way? Because I know you have the issues that you point to that you're like, we should focus on this. These are distractions. But is abortion a distraction, or is it a core issue that will really decide the direction of this country? How do you
So
feel on it?
abortion is the distraction. First of all, I mean, this isn't new. I don't think that the culture war is any more heightened now around abortion than it has been in the last 30, 40 years, any more or less. I think it's about the same. I don't think it's going to be that big of a shaker or moving people out for the midterms simply because Joe Biden still has 2 years left in his term after the midterms.
Mhm.
It'll definitely come back up again in 2024 when he's up for election. Um, so as far as like it having a big place and bringing out the Christian right, I think they're gonna just those people just vote every time anyway. And I don't think it's gonna be any more of a driver. And to add something in, I think that the last I just read a couple articles on the recent pushes, like you were saying, the Mississippi law and a few other states. I think it was like Nebraska, Texas, somebody else uh added some new stuff in too just in the last few weeks. I think that the Supreme Court is supposed to be having some sort of a ruling in like the next 30 days is what's expected. So it's going to happen well before June. At least that's what I read. I mean, they can do whatever they want. That's ultimately they can just be like, no, no. Like I don't want to right now. They can do whatever they fucking want as far as their time frame goes. Um, but how do I feel? Just to give you my personal stance on abortion, for me in my own life, me and my wife, we we're not pro-life or pro-choice. We just like we've had 3 kids. We've had discussions about abortion before we had kids and in between every kid. And we've always come back to the same. Me and my wife talk a lot. We communicate. We check back in because I'm pro-choice as far as like policy for the country. I think everyone should be able to do what me and my wife do, which is no, she doesn't want to do that. And I support her decision to not want to do that. And I also wanted to have kids. So I never really had any moral dilemma or any clash in my own personal life around it. And she's the same way. She doesn't believe in it for herself, but she does believe that other people should be able to have abortions. She's had many friends who've had abortions. She knows plenty of women that aren't her friends that are older than her that were mentors to her that have had abortions. So yeah, that's my position on it. I think people should just be able to do whatever the fuck they want. I don't think the government has any place regulating anything like that. Because it's a gigantic, especially I feel like people who have kids can understand this. Not saying that people who don't have kids can't, but I think there's like a special understanding. It's sort of like a person who's actually been to war as opposed to like people who read about it or whatever. Like having kids is really fucking hard. And I approach my pro-choice position from the simple stance that there's a lot of people walking around on this earth that are too selfish to probably even have a child, and we're probably better off that abortion exists because we do not let me finish. Yeah. We do not have in place any type of support structures to actually absorb we don't have it, whether we had abortion or not. We don't have any infrastructure in place to actually care for the amount of children that are unable to be cared for because there's a lot of just incapable parents in this world. And I feel like that's a really impossible thing for people to argue against. There's a lot of people that probably just should have never had children. And then they do. I grew up with a ton of kids that were orphans that some of them turned out to be really great people. Some of them ended up going through the carceral system. And I'm not one of those people. It's like, oh, this person's life was so bad they would have been better off and not been born. No, I don't think that. I think every soul walking on this earth. I'm not religious. We touched on some of that before. But I'm a very humanistically spiritual person, and I think that every person who walks this earth has value to me personally as a human, and I think that they mean something. So I'm not like one of those leftists who's like, oh, it's literally just like a gummy bear. When you suck it out, it's not a thing. Like, no, I believe in the spirit. We talked about on that last podcast. But at the same time, I also believe in, like the concepts around Buddhism and cosmic suffering and what decisions are made or not made, and whether people can actually say whether it was for the greater good or not. I think it's really interesting. I'll finish with this. I think it's really interesting that there's a lot of people, especially on the right, that talk about abortion that don't want to engage with the suffering argument, but then will similarly talk about things like the Iraq War or other events of mass death of political decisions that America has made collectively that have led to immense suffering, but they will only view it from the lens of, well, this was like a geopolitical foreign policy thing we did. And it was just like a procedural thing. You know what I mean? Like no one wants to reflect back on the actual deaths we've caused collectively as a society because of our reactions to things. But then everyone wants to have that moral discussion on the level of the individual and a specific woman bringing a baby to term. I think that that's really interesting because we're talking about two completely different value structures living opposed from one another and never coming into contact, specifically whether you're talking about it in a macro sense or a micro sense. I think that's really interesting. That's my piece on that.
I don't think they're totally in opposition to each other. I think it's a matter of perspective or how you perceive what you think of when you think about war. So I do want to touch a little bit. I want to first start with abortion. So when I look at abortion, there are a lot of arguments that do annoy me, honestly, from both sides. I think it just gets down to addressing one specific issue, and I know you see it as the distraction.
I mean, it is definitionally.
I find it interesting. I know, but to me though, I find it interesting because you're recently the one arguing feelings. However, the feelings on this are very strong on this topic, one way or the other.
There's a difference about feelings of what happens to you and what should happen to other people, though. That's the distinction here. You cannot conflate those two things.
Yeah, but when it comes to that, so
it's completely different, dude.
when you feel about what happens to other people, obviously, what someone's ability is to address what ability someone has to address what's happening to them is part of that equation as well. So I first want
Sure.
to address the arguments that do annoy me from both the left and the right. There's is from both sides that approaches from both sides, arguments from both sides. I actually find just ridiculous and a waste of time. The one being, okay, so from the pro-choice side, right? From the pro-choice side, I get annoyed when I hear the arguments about rape, incest, and stuff like that. And the reason I get annoyed with that, life of the mother at risk, the reason I get annoyed with that is because statistically speaking, it is like less than 1%. Around like 1% of actual abortions that take place are the result, or the reason given is rape, incest, or even the risk to the mother's life is actually not that statistically high. So that when I get that from the left, that I'm kind of like, well, statistically speaking, I mean, yes, those are tragic situations, absolutely, but statistically they're irrelevant. From the right side, you get the argument, well, abortions the day of, when the baby's supposed to be born, the day of birth, an abortion, the day before, up to the moment, kind of thing. Statistically speaking, late-term abortions are about the same. They're actually a very small percentage of abortions that take place in this country. So I find both arguments, while I understand the emotions and feelings there, statistically they're irrelevant to me. At the end of the day, what this comes down to,
I mean, you have to give credence of the difference of those two things, though, as well. I mean,
I do. This thing is
extremely different. Like a late-term abortion or a rape abortion are very different. You can't just be like, well, they're statistically both insignificant,
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand what they are. I'm just saying, as far as an argument, when it comes to the greater argument, statistically speaking, I in the greater argument, I don't give those as much weight, because at the end of the day, the argument is about autonomy.
But you're a minority. You just said earlier you're a minority rights guy. I mean, if you're, for example, there's a country with a 95% white population, and they say, oh, well, only 1% of our population is black, we're just going to make them not citizens. That would be statistically
that's
insignificant.
An action, not an identity.
It's an action to take away the opportunity for abortion for a rape victim. That's an action.
But okay,
that's also an action.
Being raped, then there's also the identity of the child who didn't do anything wrong, right? So that's where you get into the next thing. Is what, at the end of the day, the question becomes, what life are you seeing as more valuable, the mother or the child? What autonomy? It's a matter of autonomy, and both sides have to recognize. I'm sorry, use the word fetus if you want. Even the definition of fetus is basically an unborn version of the adult. When you're going earlier, so it is a life. If it's not a life, what is it then? This is the premise at the end of the day. So this is the question they have to struggle with. What life do you give more value to? And at the end, the mother, the prospective mother, or the child? I mean, at the end of the day, that is the decision that has to be made for the person. Before we can move forward in a discussion, that has to be the decision that has to be made.
Well, no, that's how right wingers would like to frame this argument, but that's not the only way it can be framed.
How is it not? It is a child. It's not something that doesn't exist.
If a woman is raped on Monday and decides to take Plan B on Thursday, that's not a child.
No, that's a different discussion. So for me,
but I'm just saying, you said earlier, with slippery slope arguments. So say we ban abortion,
you're
are we banning
something different? You're now conflating two things.
No, this is what you just said with education, though. This is the same argument you made.
I associated the morning after pill with abortion. You assume that I associated the morning after pill with abortion.
No, I'm not making an assumption. I'm doing the same thing you said. Is I'm trying to nip this in the bud. I don't want to let it get too out of control right now. I don't want abortion to be illegalized because Plan B could be next. I'm giving you your argument right
but
back.
But you're kind of making the long-term argument, yeah. So
that's literal long-term. That's 4 days versus 9 months. That has a defined period right there. Yours doesn't even have a defined period.
The morning
after. You don't know when the leftist revolution will happen.
Well, to be honest, legitimately, life does begin at the moment of conception. But
for you, sure.
It's not for it is a life at the moment of conception. It is. What is it then? Is it a yo-yo. I mean, what is it if it's not a life in the basic biological sense of the word?
Well, I mean, again, it's in my opinion, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I'm saying it depends on how the person who's arguing it defines it. If you're saying there's like some spark of spirit that immediately enters that zygote, then okay. But that's your
that
opinion, man. That's what I'm saying. Like,
I
there
wasn't
is no
arguing spirit. I was arguing
there is,
science.
like you said, I like to deal in facts and statistics. There's no way for you to factually prove that life begins at like the immediate conception.
I'm talking about life in the actual scientific biological sense. I'm not talking about the spiritual sense in that regard.
Okay, but like mold is alive, dude. Like, what's the difference?
A mold. Okay, can a mold become can that mold become human? Can it become a sentient life that will live and breathe and walk and live and feel?
There's a lot of argument that that's where all life came from, was organisms like mold.
Well, okay, if I find mold on my sandwich, will it become a human?
What,
I know, but like I'm trying to find at least
10,000 years. Who knows,
you
bro?
said earlier you pointed out getting to definitions. Earlier, you pointed out to getting to definitions, and that is the idea. The mold argument. No, that is definitely not comparative. I'm sorry. I'm calling that BS hardcore. So
it's
at the
just
end
a
of the
shorter
day,
time frame with the
autonomy.
human. That's all. Just a shorter time frame.
It's about autonomy. It's about autonomy at the end of the day.
It's whether you believe in like Big Bang or creationism. It's up to you. It's not up to me, because you're forming your basis of life around whatever you're forming it around. That's my point.
I'm forming it around science, like when it actually is, when biologically
do you believe in creationism?
When it is a unique body, when it is
creationism,
separate of itself from the mother.
Do you believe in creationism? To the fact that
it has its own genetic makeup and all that stuff. That is a life.
How did life start on Earth, Kevin?
We're not going there. We're about talking about abortion.
It's important. It's a fundamental question to what we're talking about. What do you mean we're not going there? Do you believe in creationism?
You assume that I come at the issue from just religious perspective. Then I don't.
This is a fundamental. It's a spiritual question. It's not about religion.
But no, I'm not dealing with spirituality either here. I'm dealing with the fact that once it's conception, so once that sperm goes into that egg, once it's fertilized, that you have that there, and then it is unique from the mother. It is separate from the mother. Its potential
it's inside of her and a part of her.
It is separate in its genetic makeup.
It's not separate.
Its genetic makeup. In its genetic makeup, it is not identical to the mother. It is not a clone of her. Okay, that is not true. So
I mean, it's literally like parasitically living inside of her. I don't know how you could say that's another.
I actually want to jump on that quick. So I do love how the pro-choice side does use very dehumanizing language when it comes to the unborn, because historically it's dehumanizing language that does allow people to justify very horrific actions.
Well, it's not a human. It's not a human when a sperm meets an egg. It's not a human yet.
The fertilization. So the material's not what it will become.
It's not a human, so I can dehumanize a zygote.
It's a fetus. So once you get to the point of fetus.
Sure, but that's not what we're still on the very early stage of rape here. We're still on rape, dude. We didn't get.
Yeah, but you never even. Yet. Okay, so then you never addressed. So I got a question for you. Then you said you didn't assume anything, but did you assume that I had an issue with the morning after pill?
No. I'm trying to find out, and you're not answering.
No,
me.
I don't have an issue with the morning after pill.
There you go. That's all I'm asking.
But you didn't ask me that. You did not.
I'm trying to lead you to that.
Do you have an issue with the morning after pill? You could have asked me, do you have an issue with the morning after pill? You did not. You can rewatch this. When you rewatch this, if you find where you asked me.
I know I didn't. Okay. I was trying to lead you to just dismissing it and being like, yeah, I don't care. I'm just wondering, dude. I'm not trying to gotcha. I'm wondering. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to, we're still coming back to the mother. What are you putting your support behind, the mother or the child in this regard? And to me, I see a child can't defend itself. A child has no voice in that regard. So to me, yes, I am going to come out on the side of the child there. And I think that actually because here's the thing, I think science actually is going to work against abortion in a few ways. I think it already has. The fact that we now have sonograms where you can see in such detail a baby at an earlier and earlier stage, that's a humanizing thing. That's a beautiful thing.
Sure.
And so I think that science will ultimately favor the pro-life side over the pro-choice side.
So let me ask you a
I
question.
genuinely
Let me
believe that.
ask you a question. You do realize why I just did like the little thought experiment I did, because you simultaneously said, I'm talking about a fetus, but then you kept saying life at conception. Those two things are not congruous. You can't say both of those things because in legislative terms, you're talking about a fetus, but you're
Well,
talking
with
about
the
your
morning after, so
spiritual
here's the
belief.
thing with the morning
You're talking,
after
hold on,
pill.
hold on.
No,
You're
no,
talking about your spiritual belief around conception being at immediate contact. So those two things can't be married, because you're saying, well, legislatively, I'm going by the science, but how I feel and how what really dictates the way I'm talking about this policy is at conception. That's why I did what I did, because they're incongruous. You're not saying the same thing. That's why I'm asking you. You get what I mean?
yeah, but with the morning after, first of all, there's no. So with me, because we're not there yet. If we were at a point where you could actually test for that was instant, like I'm talking instant conception, that it's done. She's pregnant. Then no, I wouldn't support the morning after pill.
So
But
you
what
support it in the fact that you might not even know and just
I
take it and it's
support it
okay
in the
because you
fact
don't
that
know.
if it's the idea that there could have been no conception at all at that point, right? The morning after, quite literally the morning after. We're talking quite literally the morning after. All right. If we're talking about that, then we don't actually know that.
Well,
And I'm
like
not someone
three
who, I
days,
don't
I'm
want to
saying,
make
like,
that kind of statement on that with even that, because, with that. But if we're at the point, this is why I say science will favor the pro life side with this. Because once we get to a point, if we can instantly, like really do that, really be like, okay, this test, okay, that's when. I honestly think the pro-life side has the advantage there, and I do think it has larger cultural ramifications. In across the board. One of the reasons I'm pro-life, and this is interesting because there's arguments about that have nothing absolutely to do necessarily with religion. Even if that is a core, you can still have a discussion about being pro-life that isn't focused
no,
on
your argument might not,
religion.
but let's not act like that's not what's happening in the country, though.
Oh no!
That's
Well, first of all, I was coming at this from a personal perspective with this. I
okay.
want to make that clear. Just like
All
you made
right.
it clear, like yeah,
All right. I was gonna say, bro.
I'm
Oh
expressing
no.
my arguments for why I'm pro-life and why I believe in protecting the child, protecting the unborn child. And I think ultimately it can be beneficial to the culture as a whole. Especially when you're dealing with declining, failure in replacement rates when it comes to birth rates. When we're dealing with issues, we're eventually going to look at a lopsided society where we have so many elderly people and not enough young people to take care of them. I'm looking at like a
Hold
long-term
on.
cultural thing here.
Hold on. Let me pause you for
Um,
1 second, bro. I
yeah,
have to take a leak real quick. I don't want to end. I have
actually,
to.
so do I.
Okay.
I'll be right
Okay.
back.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, and we're back.
Hey.
I'll have to put in some music in between there. But where were we? Where were we? Sorry.
uh, well, I was mentioning my arguments, at least, why I am pro-life from a perspective that's not just religious. I look at the impact of it as a whole population, the elderly, taking care of our elderly. But I also want to make clear that I am not blind to the other side of this. Even though statistically, conservatives, mind you, most specifically religious conservatives, donate more to charities and everything like that, there is a disconnect. I do feel that there is a bit of unwillingness on the side of the right to discuss what I think is a legitimate concern. They dismiss it when someone says, "Okay, well, how do you address the children then that are not wanted? How do you handle that situation?" I do feel like the right is often the pro-life side can be dismissive of that, not give it the attention that it deserves. Now, I don't think that I know a lot of people who are pro-life, and they adamantly support, they strongly support us working to obviously take care of those children. But unfortunately, those are not the voices on the right that are being heard when it comes to the topic of abortion.
Look at look at Mitt Romney. He was one of the only voices, and certainly one of the loudest in general, left or right, on the child tax credit that got subsidized last year. Much respect to that guy. You know what I mean? He talks the pro-life talk, and he was like, "No, I want to do legislation that fucking puts money in the pockets of mothers who raise these goddamn children." You know what I mean? Like, hey. And that's not me saying like, "Oh, I'd be okay with like banning abortion if we did subsidization."
No, I
I'm
know.
not saying that, but I'm saying at least, respect to the guy for being like, "No, I'm the whole way through." Like, you know what I mean? Not necessarily like, "Oh, if you're pro-life, you have to support cash payments," or like, "I have no respect for you." No, I'm not just saying that, but I do. It surprised me because I didn't, I never thought anything like that would come out of that man's mouth or any Republican, especially in the Senate, where they'd be like, "Yeah, let's give money to moms." Hey,
But
I'm all for that.
isn't that I think a better part of, so I know you referenced distraction. To me, the greater distraction is how surface level we are with the topics. That to me is keeping us at the surface is the greater distraction. Because look, for example, when I have more detailed discussions with someone who's pro-choice about my pro-life stance, they at least they can gain an understanding, even if they disagree with me, that some of their assumptions about me coming from that perspective may not be accurate. I acknowledge that if we're going to take a pro-life, stance, a position, it needs to be pro-life from then beginning to end, right? We need to take that. The difference is like how we approach it. I still feel like I would approach that from a more conservative perspective. Incentives in our culture that benefit, people having families, starting families, if it's especially when it's a whole family, when there are the parents there, both the parents there, and stuff like that. Like, I'm not opposed to that, especially because then that strengthens family in our culture. And if it's strengthening family in our culture, you caught my interest. So I at least, even if I walk away, and I have walked away, obviously disagreeing in many ways, I guess, obviously the legality, there is at least a better understanding of the position. And to be honest, I feel in certain cases, not in all, I'm not gonna lie, but in certain cases, I feel like we left the conversation at least with less animosity towards each other than entered it.
Sure.
We both, we entered the conversation with a great deal of those assumptions and animosity behind those assumptions. And, we left it still, disagreeing, and, we'd probably still argue about it, but at least I feel like there's less animosity. And
Well,
what
I mean,
concerns me. Oh,
Oh
go
no, well,
go on.
what I was gonna say is the reason I called it the distraction of all distractions is because it definitionally is like it's the largest single issue voting uh piece of legislation for the right for like 50 years, 60 years straight. Very much how gun legislation is a huge distraction for the left. I think that I'm not saying that it
Mhm.
doesn't have any like worth in public health or anything like that, but for the most part, it's a huge distraction because what it does is people pour all their energy and emotion into it, and then they like literally would just be like, "Oh, I'm voting for this guy because it's like he agrees with this one thing," and then all that does is it engenders an environment where anyone who's on that specific side of the aisle just needs to say those right words on that one topic, and they can do horrifying things in every other regard of their politics, and they continue to hold office. That's why I'm calling it it's an electoral distraction. I'm not saying it's a discourse, cultural war distraction. I don't think that that's the case. It's not a distraction by definition in the culture war because it's something people care very much about. So that's what I mean. Like when I'm calling it that, I'm saying it's something that allows politicians to ride on a message very
Mm, mm.
specifically on something about one topic that is largely irrelevant to people's material conditions in their life or the course that this country takes in any meaningful way in the short or medium term, which is sort of it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, it makes perfect sense why it's been the number one what I call distraction on the right, and gun legislation has been on the left because that's how our politicians think. They're creatures of 4-year cycles. You know what I mean? Like that's how their
Yeah.
minds work too. So if they can program their voters to operate in the same way, it works out perfectly for them. They don't need to worry about long-term issues Kevin Hammer's worrying about or Ramon Mile. They don't need to. They can just be like, okay, I can get fucking half the Republican Party to just come pull the lever for me because I said abortion bad. Or Eric Swalwell can go out and fucking cry while like holding an AK-47 in California and win like with no problem. Then yeah, that's it. And it's like people who are actually paying attention to the broad swath of political issues in this country are like, holy shit, is this really what is this what's controlling shit? Now, what I will say is the good thing is a lot of the heated discourse between the left and the right because of the advent of the internet has blunted that effect a lot. I will admit that.
Mm.
It's blunted. But again, I go back to it's these 50-year-old and older people deciding these fucking elections, and a lot of them are stuck in the same bullshit cycles they've been voting on for the last 30 years. And it's these issues. It's guns,
I,
it's abortion, it's CRT, it's a lot of these culture war issues that we're talking about, while in the meantime the Fed's bailing out, giving free corporate debt, negative interest rates for 2 fucking years. They're soaking Wall Street in free money. All these things that will immediately impact and shorten the long-term prospects of Americans' prosperity that no one cares or pays any attention to because it's so Byzantine on purpose. The systems are created that way and no one notices it. You know what I mean? Like
so
I'm saying it's a
yeah.
distraction in comparison to these other things that it's like, no, this shit is changing your life now. Like your mortgage interest rate just went up now. You know what I'm like? The Fed is about to force a recession now. Like, yeah, that's now. It's not just, oh, in 2 years and 4 years, when I'm president, I'm going to put the right person on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Like that's not really going to, lady, you're 60. You're not having an abortion. What the fuck are you caring so much about this? I don't understand it. I don't understand how people can spend so much of their political life cycle being so concerned about and shit that just will never affect them personally. That's what baffles me the most, is because it goes from that same, ask not what your country can do for you type shit, where it's like, no, we need to get back to a place of where people do need to be voting in their own self-interest to some regard. Like we're in this like really weird space where like everyone's voting about shit because it's like, well, I don't want that person to be able to do this. And it's like, well, what the fuck?
So I got a
This is
question.
this
I
is
got a
why shit
question now.
is just progressively getting worse because
I got
no
a
one is
question now.
voting selfishly. They're voting
Do you
with they're
do you
voting they're
see
voting with vengeance. And that's a cycle for destruction. That's
do you see
what
how
I'm
people would see an issue, and this isn't even necessarily about political affiliation. why people would see an issue that to most observers they would say, oh, that doesn't impact you, as to why they would see that issue as very much impacting them. This generally tends to
What,
be the
birth
long term.
rates?
What?
What, birth
Yeah.
rates?
Well, it tends to be the long, and I'm not even. I mean, I know we're focused on abortion, but I'm not even necessarily just talking about abortion per se. But for a lot of people who think about long-term perspectives, there, and I'm not accrediting this. I'm not accrediting this to our politicians. I want to stress that. I think our politicians on both sides of the aisle definitely. I don't feel they really have a strong drive, probably a majority of them, to actually resolve any conflicts in our culture, because
No.
it's those conflicts that they use. I'm talking about from a voter's perspective, from just a citizen's perspective. Why they might care about an issue that an observer would say, well, that issue doesn't impact you, is because they look at the long-term cultural impact, or what they perceive that threat to be, and what could possibly result from that, which depending on how long that possible impact could take to take effect, could very much impact them, or definitely their children and their lineage from there. So
Sure.
that's a matter of perspective of that issue doesn't impact you, is very much of how someone thinks about that issue
Or how
at the end
someone
of the day.
feels, to go back to what you talked about.
Yeah,
It's about
or
how
how someone
someone
feels. But the
feels. It's not.
question is, that's when you then get into the discussion, is what legitimacy is there to that position? Is there a historical, what issue can you point to? And this is why I do, even though I know you'll argue the comparative, I'm just explaining why I point to it, why I point to my personal experience of issues that I've witnessed in my lifetime go from fringe and have the long-term impacts on the culture. Is I point to specific examples, to things I've seen, as the fact that, hey, yeah, things can impact it long term from the positive and the negative. And that's why I do come at some things from, well, many things, I'm not gonna lie, I do look long term, but that doesn't mean that I have a complete disregard for the immediate, although that's where we need to have that discussion. So I guess I have a question for you then, if you don't mind. I want to toss one at you.
Mhm.
What pathway, because I know you, like you said, you're focusing on a forced recession, right? You mentioned that.
No. It's,
And
dude. It's literally the Fed just raised interest rates, and they're saying that it's going to be raised like 4 or 5 more
yeah,
times this year. That's a forced recession. That's what's
so,
happening. That's what's about to happen. Oh shit! I think I lost you, man.
yeah.
Uh
So
oh.
I've got a question for you. I wasn't so much
Yeah.
about an explanation of that. My question for you is: do you see a path, a way, or some way to put those issues, at least get them to the same interest level of the cultural issues that you see as the distraction? Do you see a path? I mean, obviously, it probably will be detailed, but is there gifs of it, of a course that you feel our country could take, to where we could alter that perception, where, you know, that a recession is just as up there as gun legislation and abortion.
Sure.
What like
What?
and
Well.
on people's minds as consistently.
So my answer to that would be is it's just like a lot of the other economic issues that I discuss, which is it's a hopeless fucking wish, honestly, to wish that enough Americans would become educated on macroeconomics and how the Fed actually operates in this country now in the modern context, as opposed to what it used to operate like when we were on the gold standard. No, that's a hopeless prospect. Like
So,
it would require tens of millions of people who actually voted to actually learn something. No one fucking reads. Everyone wants to watch videos. No, everyone watches TV. They watch talking heads to fucking tell them, and none of those assholes will ever tell them, hey, by the way, the Fed's about to force a recession on you, just like they didn't after '08. But all the people who knew better and actually knew how to do political and economic analysis knew for a fact what was happening coming out of that, as soon as interest rates damn near doubled after the housing market bubble. So it's not a matter of how can I get people to care about these issues more at the forefront, because even if we could do or I could like, have some giant megaphone. I mean, Jesus Christ, Bernie Sanders for the last 2 election cycles was the biggest megaphone the left's ever going to get. We're probably not going to get one that big ever again. Not in my fucking lifetime. I don't think so. Who's up next? AOC? She's co-opted. She's fucking she's wearing a goddamn collar, and Nancy Pelosi's holding the leash now. So to be honest with you, no, I don't think so. And I think that a lot of people enjoy delving into and throwing elbows in the mosh pit of the culture war. It's too much fun because it's something that people can all immediately have an anecdotal story about or a personal experience on, and it's relatable in some way. How the fuck is anyone supposed to relate with Larry Summers talking about the other day on Twitter how like the New York Times has like no intellectual diversity because they don't have any like Marxist or leftist professors ever write any op-eds, and he was talking about that in relation to the forced recession that's definitely coming. How do you get people to pay attention? You got to be sick in the mind to actually fucking, and when I say sick in the mind, I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm saying like you have to be fucking neck deep in politics to get to the level to actually be like, oh, this is what's happening. I'm gonna be predictive here and see what's coming a year out. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see fucking hope for that, man. I don't see any at all. There's too many distractions in America. And half the people, like what I said on the last podcast, are too busy treading water just to be able to fucking just be able to get some more gulps of air. Most people don't have the time to even pay attention to this shit. And the thing is, what the saddest part about it is, other countries, and not just European countries, like, in the news recently, like Ukraine, Russia, even people in those countries that aren't anywhere near as there's a ton more poverty in a lot of those countries compared to America, but those people are still more in tune to understanding that it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum the group that's fucking you in the ass comes from. They're doing the fucking. And America has this special ability where it's like, well, this guy in the blue shirt was really nice to me last time. So like, I'm not as mad at him. I just really hate the red shirt guy. So I'm just going to keep voting for the blue shirt guy. Like, we have this special fucking thing in America. I swear to God, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because all these other systems we're talking about are parliamentary, but like we have this special thing in this country where it's like people will just have purposeful cognitive dissonance around these things that we're talking about and then just be like, well, Orange Man bad last time, so like Biden's the president now, or like, Biden was like eating ice cream while 2,500 Americans were dying a day from COVID, or I don't like the way he dealt with this thing, so I'm voting Republican this time. Like, that's how fucking fickle a ton of like our independent voters and like centrists in this country are, to the point where it's like, well, what are we doing here? I don't even know anymore. I don't even know why I'm talking about any of this shit anymore. I don't know what is the fucking point, honestly.
Okay,
Because
I feel like I'm about to see you go into a corner and rock back and forth. Please, no, I'm just kidding.
No. I enjoy this though. That's the real
I've
answer.
enjoyed this, and at the end of the day, with it, I guess
I'm a sick person, Kevin.
I know. Okay. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, I will get into some of the most heated back and forth, yelling at someone, and if it's the right person, though, like some of my good friends, we can actually call each other names and still afterwards be like, "Hey, let's go out for a beer," right? Like we're like really, there's a sickness in the way we're enjoying it.
For sure.
Absolutely.
But you know what the real answer is? Before I'll let you go, I just want to say this. Do you know what the real answer though is? Your question, like how does this get through to enough people? There has to be enough damage done. There has to be that forced recession or like fucked up economic situation look what happened in the 70s with when inflation, late 70s when inflation ran out of control. It's the same thing, same example. It has to fuck enough people's lives up enough to snap them out of the bullshit of the normal political discourse to be like, wait. Nah, this isn't happening. No, fuck that. That's the answer. And I don't think we're going to get there. They just proved that they're willing to do enough quantitative easing to the Fed to throw money wherever need be to make it not so drastic. They've become much more willing to do that. So I don't know.
And it's terrifying. And I will admit, sometimes it is very, even for myself, it's very kind of throw the hands up in the air a little bit with it. I don't know though. I still think there's ways to draw people's attention to things? Will you draw their attention in a deeply invested way? Maybe not, but I think it's also a matter of accepting that. Unless you're going to take the approach of only those educated on issues can vote, which
Yeah, it's a bad idea. It's a
yeah.
bad idea.
Because I'm just saying that is that if you follow a course of an argument bitching about people not being educated and voting,
Sure.
honestly, eventually someone touches on that as a
Yeah.
solution to that, right?
Too many guns in America, dog. Too many guns. That's
Yeah,
the
I'm
fast.
just
You want to talk about the fastest path to a revolution? That's it. You start
yeah,
taking voting
yeah,
rights from folks. The
absolutely.
fastest
But I'm
fucking
just
way.
across the political spectrum. I'm just saying that. So it's interesting because some of these arguments, you're like, I will admit there are certain arguments where I'm like an argument. I'm like, okay, I have to step back though, because the one of the conclusions I could see someone attempting to draw with this argument, with this course, is not something I can agree with. Even though I feel passionately, I'm like,
Sure.
where this path could go isn't something I support. So I do want to ask, and then I kind of have to wrap up because what are we? Wow, we are at 2 hours and
Yeah,
35 minutes. Luckily,
we're in a
we can be
long one.
broken up, right? Because we talked about separate issues. I
Yeah,
got a
for sure.
question for you. Do you feel and I'm not necessarily, I'm just talking about personality and stuff like that. Do you feel a need to like a politician in order to vote for them? Because this is a constant thing I butt into is I vote since I really try to focus on voting values. I don't need to necessarily like the politician. I don't need to want to have a beer with them to invite them over to dinner for me to vote for them. That's my personal take on it. But I feel like a lot of people need to like fully like this is my friend, this is my buddy, and then put that individual up on a pedestal and can't see the negative about them. And that's what's required for them to really support someone is they need that kind of relationship, or at least perceive it in their head. I just want to ask you, do you feel that you, first of all, do you need to like a politician to vote for them? And do you think that that desire is an issue in our political system?
I mean, I'm a super cynical political observer, so I'm pretty unique in the fact that like I almost voted for Trump. Like I don't like him at all. Uh from an accelerationist standpoint, I almost voted for him. I didn't, but um no, I definitely think I used to be like that. Perfect
Mm,
example, just quick anecdotal story. I didn't vote for her because I'm not in Minnesota, but Ilhan Omar, when she first came onto the scene, a lot of the people on the left embraced her, and I had a problem with her for the same reasons. And again, this caught me a bunch of flack on the left, but I just be honest. I just tell people like, hey, this is how I feel. You know what I mean? Like whatever, like do with it what you will. You want to get mad at me or whatever, but I'm telling you why, and I'm being honest. Um, when she first came on the political scene, I had the same problem with her I have with a lot of Southern uh, Republicans and Democrats, where I had an aversion very early on in my political awakening where I didn't really like any politician that I felt wasn't good at communicating. And obviously, her being a refugee that came to America and being an immigrant, and I did a ton of self reflection where I was like, is this like xenophobic of me to like not I didn't like not think like, oh, she shouldn't be in Congress. No, I just like I would hear her talk and it's like, how effective can you really be? Because like I'm having a hard time understanding you. And I'm like a black guy from New York. You know what I mean? Like so I had a huge problem with that because I don't think that people should be in power that are poor communicators. So like all these like foghorn, leghorn, Southern Democrats and Republicans who are like, oh, I do declare that like can barely speak English. I hated that shit too. Um, but then I realized as I watched her grow in Congress, I was like, holy shit, she's dunking on Elliot Abrams. Oh, she's talking shit about Israel openly and like how they're an apartheid state. Okay, cool. I can get behind this. Still didn't really like her, but I was like, I'd fucking vote for her a million times over because
mm,
her politics line up with mine. You know what I mean? Like
mm,
that's so no, I don't think now at this phase where I am now, um, I think I've gotten past that hurdle, and especially I think that was a pretty significant realization of my own in a test because it was someone who I was politically aligned with while disliking her. You know what I mean? Like, and then like as I saw her vote more and things like that, I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Yeah, I don't give a shit. You're voting, right? I don't care what you say or do or anything. If because again, like, what's the point of voting for someone? It's so they pass shit and vote on things that you want. You know what I mean? Like that is the point. It's not so you can like feel like, oh, I'd have a beer with Rand Paul. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's how are they going to vote? You know what I mean? So I would answer no to that
Yeah.
now. Maybe
I will,
Ramon 4 or 5 years ago would have answered differently.
because I will admit there was a time in my life where, and interesting enough, it was when I was more left leaning, when I was a registered Democrat, where I did feel desire to need to like a candidate more before voting. Like with Bernie and Hillary, right during the primaries, I actually voted for Bernie, which is funny when I talk to
There you
people
go.
and they're like, "Wow, you voted for Bernie," and 2020 you're voting for Trump. So it was interesting though because like when I think about it, and I thought about Bernie and I thought about how I approached politics. If it wasn't like immediately impacting my life, that was another thing. If it wasn't immediately impacting my life, which is why I was so identity focused, I think, with the LGBT community at that time, because that was more directly, obviously, impacting me, was that outside of those direct impacts, or what I perceived to be direct impacts, I wanted the politician that I could chat with. I looked at Bernie and Hillary and I was like, Bernie just is like that funny uncle that you can just sit back and have a conversation with, right? A little bit kooky, but all that stuff, it's all good and everything like that. And that was kind of how I realized I was looking at politics. And then later on, I was like, yeah, but do I believe with a lot of the policies? What are my views on his actual policies, his actual positions, and not just so much like his intent, because intent, I mean, as they say, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So it's not so much even someone's intent, because there are a lot of people that I think have the best of intentions, but when I look at how they want to go about it, I'm like, no, that's where I have to step back and be like, no, okay, I can't support that. I understand your intentions and I think they're great. I do. I'm not demonizing you, which is an issue I see so much. I do believe is so prevalent in our culture right now, is demonizing the other side, whether, just on social issues or political perspectives, political approaches. So I had to step back from that. I had to separate those things. And it's interesting because so Trump did one thing in politics, him coming in and busting, just like it was always there to a degree. You can always find it, but Trump, let's be honest, has a way of highlighting things in in dramatic fashion. All right, attention goes to it. So one of my favorite things that I would do is I'd watch British Parliament, right? Just because I will admit I enjoyed how they interact with each other and what I consider a more real. When I watch the Brits interact with each other in over politics in Parliament, I see my family having a discussion, because we are just like my family. When we talk about issues, we're not about, like I know some families sweep under the rugs, passive aggressive. No, that's not us. We're very direct. You're an idiot for thinking this, all right? I love you, but you're an idiot for thinking this. I like that is my family's approach to things. So I honestly especially I get it from the conservative side. I will get a little bit of looks because it's all about propriety to a degree. At least with a lot of mainstream on the conservative side. And I'm like, yeah, but I want more honest dialogue. If these politicians have a core issue with each other, I have no problem with them addressing it for all of us to see and listening to the discussion. That's more interesting to me. That's more engaging.
I'm here for the political blood sport. I think
Yeah,
civility.
and I had like people are like, and I love it because one person, I was like, right off the bat, I had to stop them because I knew but we have more of a long history of being civil. I was like, okay, no. I was like, we have duels.
They used to line up and shoot each other.
Yeah, like, I was like, we have duels in our politics.
Years ago, what the fuck?
We have a man beating another man with a cane.
Yeah,
I mean, right there in Congress. I was like, so please don't use that argument with me. I think honestly, being a bit more real, because I will say this. I was able to develop more of a view and really develop my perception a bit more. One of the individuals where that really changed here was Nancy Pelosi. What Trump brought out in Nancy Pelosi was one of the things that I honestly consider Trump's. To me, it was a great gift because Pelosi, to me at least, she at least for most Americans had this very specific view. There was a little bit more of this propriety, this civil way of behaving, and Trump just demolished that. She couldn't help herself, but the cracks started forming
she
with
called
Trump.
him obese.
Exactly.
She started doing shit she never did before.
And while I know that's not necessarily productive, it felt real. It felt like, while I agree, I wouldn't want us to just end up calling each other fat all the time or anything. And I don't, also, it was one of the first times that I looked at politics and saw something at least a little bit more real, a little bit more of substance. So I honestly think when it comes to politics, when I look at politicians now, I actually question how real they are. And, obviously values are at the end of the day, but I'm not opposed. If there's a politician who in the campaign, and I support their values, and they say, listen, this person's an idiot, a direct idiot because of this, and they go down the list, screw civility if that helps draw attention to it.
I agree.
I think we're a bit trying to be too civil in that regard. And even though our history doesn't support behaving that way when it comes to politics, personally,
I completely agree. But all right, man, we'll end the stream here, and I'll just finish by saying the last thing. I'll correct the record when I said earlier I was like, oh, I didn't even like Trump. I do like Trump. He's arguably the funniest person that's been on TV in like the last 20 years. I just because I don't agree with any of his politics doesn't mean I couldn't appreciate the showmanship, the fresh breath of the breath of fresh air he added to the politics. And again, like literally like the funniest person like in decades to ever be on television at all, ever at all. Yeah. So just wanted to correct that. I know that a lot of folks on the left don't like to admit that, but Twitter has not been the same since he's been gone. It was way funnier. It was way funnier. But all right, hey man, we'll cap it off here. I'll probably end up chopping this shit up. Holy shit, we almost went 3 hours, bro.
I was gonna say we talked about three different things at least. You could cut that up.
I wanted to get into some COVID shit. That was one of the topics.
Oh yes, and I'm down for that. I would love for us to discuss COVID if you would be up for a stream on that.
For sure, man. For sure. I got like I mentioned before, I'm gonna probably get some of my NFL boys on an in between here. So we'll probably shoot for. Oh man, I'm sorry. Excuse me. We'll probably shoot for sometime in a couple 2-3 weeks, something like that. Because I got to try to fit one in, and I got to get my Ukraine episode off. So we got.
Which send me both of those when you do that, because the NFL one is fascinating me. I'm not gonna lie, and it's fascinating me to touch on a point that you brought up is when we were talking about education and children. Is politics too ingrained in the culture to avoid that impact? And to a degree, I understand that position. For crying out loud, we have our sports, our people that are supposed to talk about sports are spending their time talking about the political issues of the day when they should just be talking about the game. Right?
Well, because as much as people are like, oh, I don't want to hear about this, people want to hear about it. It's all people are consuming now. That's it. It's where we are, man. And I know a lot of people don't like to deal with it because a lot of those folks who don't like it are those same older folks you referenced before, where you were like, they were raised in we don't talk about politics and religion. And it's like, well, yeah. And they were starved of that for a long time, and they're participating in it just as much as our generation is. So, but all right, yeah, man, we'll save that for the next one. Thank you everybody for listening. We got Kevin Hammer. Do you have anything you'd like to plug? Is your channel back live? Are you pushing any content or got old catalog stuff you want people to check out?
I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook page where I do stream from time to time. I have streamed to my YouTube channel. They are two different names. My Facebook page is Schenectady, The Conservative Perspective. While I do touch on some national issues there, when I do stream there and have guests, I try to bring it home. I had an interview with Alicia Purdy. She was a mayoral candidate in the city of Albany. Tom Kennedy is involved locally, especially with the police. He's a retired police officer. I have some interviews in the future with local politicians. I actually had Josh Cuomo from Rotterdam on my stream. So I had Eric Hess. So I've had a few local politicians on there. So once again, that's Schenectady, the Conservative Perspective. That's on Facebook. On YouTube, I have the Issues from Left to Right. That is the name of my channel. There, I unfortunately, life gets in the way. I had a group of friends where two of us were conservative, two of us are liberal. We would sit down and talk about the politics of the day, talk about the issues from the conservative and the liberal perspective. That was amazing. I'm trying to get us back together to do some of those streams, but I am streaming. Some of my streams are going to both the YouTube channel and the Facebook page. So please feel free to check those out.
All right. Thanks for coming on, man. And folks, check them out if you like the combo, and we'll see you next time. All right. All right, brother. Appreciate it. Holy shit, I'm tired.
It's still counting on my end.
Yeah, I know. Well, no, I stopped the podcast stream.
Oh, okay. You stopped the podcast. Okay.
Yeah. But all right, but we're still live on YouTube. So for all the YouTube folks, we're going to say the true goodbye now. Kevin, I'll see you next time, man.
See you next time.
Later.